Warning, this podcast contains scenes of explicit nonsense and lore.
Previously on the Resident Evil podcast.
I mean, I'm not as much of a canon stickler as some people, and that's no slight against anyone who is.
Changes with Operation Javier, things like that I didn't like because they were just so unnecessary. You know, the changes didn't benefit the plot, whereas the changes with the Plaga did benefit the plot.
The original game exists. We don't want to make a one-for-one remake, exactly the same. We want to do something different and interesting with it.
With Salazar's fight, I'll put my hand up in the air and say I prefer the original.
And lo and behold, there's also a parasitic BOW that just happens to be dug up in the nearby castle.
This feels like a proper sequel to Remake 2.
The Resident Evil Podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 88 of the Resident Evil Podcast, where some might call us the voices of Gaia, and we are still more determined than ever to establish a kingdom where beauty has absolute authority. I'm Nick, better known as Neptune, firing off torpedo kids left, right and centre. Let's see who's joining us today. He's everyone's favourite Dongua. It's the Batman.
Good evening.
This season, he'll be mostly wearing organic high heels. It stars Tyrant.
Hello.
And finally, look out, it's a monster! Oh, no, it's just Rompy.
Hello!
Coming up on today's podcast, we are delighted to be taking a retrospective look back at Resident Evil Dead Aim. Yes, it's 20 years since this quirky spin-off hit the shelves, and what better excuse to look back in true REP style with a hybrid happy birthday retrospective analysis. So we'll be taking that deep dive into Dead Aim 20 years on, see how it holds up. We'll also be catching up on some of the news before ending with, of course, another Neptune's Biohazard quiz. So let's start with the news. First bit of news, Resident Evil Death Island is now out in some areas. It's been a very odd, scattered release. But if you live in particular parts of the world, you can not only see Death Island, you can go to the cinema and see it, which is rather exciting. So it got releases like Mexico, Philippines, Taiwan, I think, as well, has had a release. Reception seems to be actually pretty good, I think.
I have not really seen any because I'm trying to keep out of spoilers.
Yeah, that's understandable. I think Alex, CVX Freak, has seen it, and he's. I didn't read the spoilers like that, but he seemed to think it was an enjoyable ride. I think was the overall impression I got.
The best of the CGI movies, which I don't know how that qualifies in your own personal opinion, but
I'm looking for
it at least.
But yeah, so it's not out yet. Generally in America, most of Europe, so we're going to have to wait a bit longer. For all UK people, because mainly a UK podcast, still not available to pre-order on Amazon yet, or anywhere, I don't think. So they're pushing it a little bit. I do keep checking daily on Amazon to see if I can get it, because it should be available in DVD, Blu-ray, and UHD, which would be interesting. I think Amazon France, I think you can get it, but the UK Amazon not yet. Rob, Batman, what have you heard? I think you're a bit more liberal on finding out what people have been saying, John especially.
Well, I've still kept myself spoiler free, but I've been reading a few of the non-spoiler opinions, and I think it's pretty much what we expected. I think it's a bit of a hot mess, but because it's sort of a brand new thing and it's fresh in everyone's eyes, everyone's kind of swooning over it, and because of the characters involved, everyone seems quite pleased with Jill's role in the film. There's a lot of buzz about Jill and Leon in particular.
Oh.
Yeah, again, I don't know the spoilers or any of the specifics, but a majority of opinions I've read is it's just by the numbers. You know, if you've seen the other CG Resident Evil films, then this one's not going to be much different. It's just more of the same, but still looking forward to it.
Rob, any comments? Any preliminary opinions?
No, I've avoided reading anything about it. I know it's coming to a local streaming service for rent on the 26th, the same day it comes out overseas. So, like for Blu-ray and all that sort of stuff. So, I don't know if it'll even get a physical release here, but at least I know it's streaming. So, keep an eye out in case there is a physical release overseas that I can get. reasonably easy. But yeah, well, take it as it comes.
Well, rest assured, everyone, we'll of course be bringing you our review of Death Island. Last bit of news, hasn't been too much. The achievements for Resident Evil 4 Remake have seemingly, I would say leaked, but have been, I think they've shown on Steam, I think they were, suggesting something, or a kind of updated achievement, suggesting something is coming soon. I wonder what that could possibly be, ladies and gentlemen. Separate Ways is imminent. It should be quite exciting, I think. I'm quite excited to go back to the world of Remake 4. I'm only just kind of getting myself over it, but I'm really excited to see what they do with Ada and Wesker to kind of tease what we got in the main game. So I'm hoping it's just as good as the main title.
Absolutely, yeah. And it would be nice if it comes out relatively quickly. I wasn't really expecting it until towards the end of the year. But it would be nice if it came out maybe August, September time, while it's the base game still relatively fresh in everyone's minds. Like you've just said, I'm very much intrigued to see where they go with it in terms of Ada and Wesker, and whether there's going to be a sort of expanded Ada's report and things like that. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it.
As we discussed in previous RE4 podcasts, it looks like there's a bit of a deviation with the Plagas, and this kind of new Amber piece, which is a bit new to the lore. Now, unlike perhaps some changes to like Remake 3 with the kind of antivirus, the kind of cure, that didn't really change up future titles too much. But this potentially could have an impact on RE5, depending on where they want to go with it. So yes, I think you're right, and it bit more information about the amber and the superior species perhaps would be interesting, just to see if that does tie in to RE5, or as that kind of conclusion were that this is a bit of a separate timeline potentially. We shall see. But yes, obviously there'll be more coverage of that. And we're hopefully looking forward to an announcement from Capcom soon. Perhaps we might get another RE, showcase in the next couple of months. That is it for the main news. Quickly turn our attention to site news, where as first we always want to thank any new patrons who have joined us, and a big shout out goes to Tinkt87. Thank you so much for joining Patreon. If anyone's interested in Patreon and what we do, it's more of a thank you, and we're genuinely grateful for anyone that can support us. It really helps keep the website going and podcast and hosting and things like that. Really important. So a big thank you to them. If you're interested, you head over to Patreon. You can search for REP or head over to the website and click on the Patreon link. You'll be able to see it at the bottom there. Talking of website updates and websites generally, we have had a big one. Yes, that's right. The lore room over on REP has been updated quite substantially because of the amazing work done by the Batman here. Because we have new translations, all from Resident Evil Remake. And that's had a big update. We've now got full translated versions of the Keitei Shinsho, the official navigation book, the capture guide, and more importantly for most people in the West, Wesker's Reports 1 and 2, and there's a bit of gun lore porn as well there with the Samurai Edge story, which we know people like the gun lore. So there we go. So John, you've done a fantastic job with all these big updates here. What's your what can people heading over to the website expect from these?
Well, yeah, it's just a lot of backstory and background material, which will hopefully enhance your enjoyment of the game. Extra lore on the characters, their equipment, the guns, the organizations, and obviously Wesker's Reports, quite self-explanatory. It goes into the background of Umbrella and his history and the T-Virus project, etc. It's just adding, meat to the bones of the storyline, really, because as we've discussed more than once, there's a lot of storyline in Resident Evil doesn't actually make it into the final game. There's a lot of stuff going on in the background, and Resident Evil Remake is no exception. So yeah, I would recommend anyone who has got a passing interest in the storyline to definitely stop by the lore room and check it out.
A couple of highlights I wanted to pick out on was in the Keitei Shinsho, there's the commentary by Benny someone. I can't pronounce his surname.
Matsuyama.
Thank you very much. And what's cool, because there's always a lot of talk about what's the canon version of Remake, or the mansion incident. What's the canon version of RE2? And and there's no real definitive answer. You can work out what some things have to have happened because of subsequent storylines, but you're kind of left up to your own devices. Now, if you've ever read like the archives, Resident Evil archives, that kind of puts an extract, a version forward. But the Benny's commentary is quite helpful, as that kind of implies that's possibly the most accurate, well, not accurate one, but that's another pretty good interpretation of who does what.
Yeah, pretty much. It gives you sort of a clear picture of who was where and who did what during the mansion incident. But whether that's the definitive route through it or not, I think it's still up to the player at the end of the day. These sort of Benny Matsuyama texts are more sort of novellas that sort of supplement the book, and he's wrote similar storylines for Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 4, which we've already done, and Resident Evil 3 as well, and Code Veronica. So there's still quite a bit to do. The next lore room update is probably going to be for Biohazard 5. I've already done most of it. We've got the BSAA desktop, which is probably one of the best pieces of supplemental material for the whole series. It goes into amazing detail, provides a lot of backstory for the events leading up to Resident Evil 5. That goes hand in hand with Adam's blog and the BSAA observation diary as well, which was originally published in Famitsu, but written under the supervision of Capcom. And also there is a promotional booklet called Resident Evil 5 Declassified, which was never released publicly. It was only made available to the press. And again, that's got lots of information on the characters and organizations, etc. And then finally, there's the Biohazard 5 Kaita Shinsho, which again goes into really quite substantial depth on the characters, the storyline. So that's still going to take a bit of time to finish, but hopefully we'll get that out sometime in the next couple of months.
Final bit of site news very quickly, and of course links in very nicely with today's podcast. The team gathered a couple of weeks ago to play Resident Evil Dead Aim in preparation of this podcast, and we have done a Dead Aim lore playthrough on our YouTube page. So this was streamed live, technical glitches as always, but not, it's great. Sean did a fantastic job in getting that set up for us, but you can play, we go through the entire game with the team kind of chatting, not just about, what's going on at that moment, but trying to get as much of the kind of background lore into the discussions and trying to pin down some of the dates and the importance, perhaps, of the Spencer reign. So thank you, Sean, for that, for hosting. That was excellent.
Welcome.
That was good fun. They're always good fun. That's the second one we've done. We've kind of done a Gaiden one, and now we've done Dead Aim. So I think we'll probably have to do Revelations next.
I was literally going to say the same thing. Yeah, another boat.
It has to be a boat. Yeah. Then we could maybe just do the Annabelle section of RE7, because that's probably the most lore-filled part anyway. But there we go. Yes. But they're good fun, and we had good turnout and some good questions, and head over to that. That's on YouTube now. That does finish our look at the news. We now turn our attention to why we are here today. We are celebrating 20 glorious years of Resident Evil Dead Aim. Cast your minds back if you can. Resident Evil on the PlayStation was in a poor state back in the early noughties. We had Code Veronica, but then the GameCube announcement came and the PlayStation 2 owners were left with just Survivor 2 as its consolation prize. But then, what's this? A new original story? Oh, it's Survivor 4. Hopes were very low, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you. Expectations minimal. But what emerged, renamed to be Dead Aim in the West, would be the beacon of hope, and what would ultimately go on to be a template for future Resident Evils to come. Yes, we at REP, we love a bit of Dead Aim, and hardly a podcast goes by without us jamming in a reference somewhere along the lines. And today we let Heroes Never Die take centre stage once again in this 20-year happy anniversary retrospective. This discussion will sort of merge our usual happy birthday playthroughs experience with that of what you might expect on a 10-year retrospective podcast, simply because, similar to Survivor 1, the playthrough choices for the games don't deviate too much like they would perhaps in a mainline game. So we're kind of like merging our two themes into this one joyous occasion. So let's rewind and go back to the Spencer reign. So to kick off, I think it's important that we have a quick brief overview of Dead Aim now, where it sits in the franchise, especially of course with Resident Evil 7 and Village very much taking kind of first person and ironically third person stance in the case of Village, something Dead Aim did as well. And there's no better person to start than Stars Tyrant, because Dead Aim, back in episode 4 of the Resident Evil podcast, ladies and gentlemen, this was your debut. It was. So I'll hand the reins. What are your brief impressions of Dead Aim, and where does it sit for you?
Well, whenever I've published like the tier list or anything like that, most people are always surprised of all the sort of choices that I do, whether I put 7 in the top tier and things like that. Dead Aim is usually hovering like the tier below top, and people always say, Dead Aim that high, you're ridiculous. And in all honesty, my opinion hasn't changed. I love it. I think it's my opinion of it remains as well as to why it's a special title for me, because it still represented a Capcom that finally showed they could make a Resident Evil title that had no real connection to the classic games outside of a reference or two here or there in a file, and everything was made from original assets. There wasn't any imported stuff like there was in Survivor and things like that. It was essentially a built from the ground up original title, and it was wrapped in the trappings of a Survivor game, but I just remember the summer it came out, we had 2 releases, because we had a very delayed 0 release in the UK in 2003. 0 came out in 2002 in Japan, I think, and we had a very delayed release over here. That was around the era when PAL releases were still upwards of like 6 months later from the Japanese releases. So that summer we had 0 and Dead Aim, and I remember being so much happier with Dead Aim as a title. It just ticked all those boxes because I wanted something fresh and something new, and that's what Dead Aim was. And I just admired the bravery of it. The fact that you could actually just totally remove yourself from the core storyline that everybody was expecting at that point, which is all the the going into the sort of Heroes versus Umbrella storyline, and they kind of bypass that and they just do their own thing. They basically make a James Bond title with a Resident Evil wrapping. And for me, it just totally worked. It just totally worked. And as now looking back 20 years later, to see some very early groundwork put in terms of like just subtle things like typewriters not needing ink ribbons anymore, and just a much more linear sense of progression that Resident Evil 4 would tend to borrow from. This was one of the first games that you could say it had, being able to blast enemies in key hit zones. Okay, it was only the critical hit mechanic, but the point was it lent a bit more to skill, if you like, that Resident Evil 4 would obviously borrow later with things like that. And I know some people are probably rolling their eyes and they'll say, oh, these are stretches, but they still start somewhere when you look back at a series legacy, and Dead Aim is the beginning of a few of them. I'm not saying it influenced really anything, but you could say that some blueprints were placed in this one. And just from a personal point of view, so I'm not rambling too much, this is very much a full circle moment for me on this podcast, because of my enthusiasm towards Dead Aim. I contacted you, Nick. I begged to be on that. Whenever you cover Dead Aim, I'd love to be on that one, and you invited me on, and then that led on to the Resident Evil 5 podcast, and that is, ladies and gentlemen, how I got my place here. If it wasn't for Dead Aim, that may never have happened. So I owe that game a lot, and it's nice to celebrate it today.
Brilliant. I mean, it's testament to the fact that we did it as episode 4. Shows how much it was generally liked at the time. We had the whole series at that point up to 2012. We could have, we did 1. We could have picked 2, 3. We could have picked ages, but no. Episode 4, we're going straight into Dead Aim. We were that enthusiastic about it. Rob B, what about you, my friend? What's your impressions of Dead Aim 20 years on?
It's interesting that it's kind of what you've alluded to, that it's got this legacy of kind of doing a few things before they became mainline franchise things, but then it becomes this kind of forgotten game for a lot of people because of its specificity of the platform and timing. Like, you had to have a PlayStation at the time to really appreciate it, and if you tried to pick it up now and play it, if you hadn't had that experience, you probably will find it a bit probably difficult and clunky, just because, it was of its time. It's funny though, because I just think back to the reaction. Like, I think well, I'm not going to say I've got them on, but I think you guys have got nostalgia goggles on for it, which is fine, and that's no problem. And it's not that I don't like the game, I do, don't get me wrong, but I do remember at the time that kind of in your opening, that the concept of you saying, that we got Dead Aim on the PlayStation while the rest of the titles went to the GameCube. People were still pretty bitter about this because they looked at this and went, "This is what we're getting? Seriously?" And then the Outbreak titles as well, depending on people's view at the time, were perhaps looked upon slightly better or slightly worse. It's very funny to see it in this one. I've always enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun little side romp. I thought it was interesting doing the first and third person perspectives, and so those things have held up very well for me. I think it's slightly comical and a bit ridiculous and a bit over the top, and I think it's completely tongue-in-cheek, and it definitely feels like a Roger Moore era James Bond title in that respect.
Yes, definitely, certainly got those vibes going on. Batman, what about you? Where do you see this game?
I think Dead Aim is a bit of a strange beast. I mean, I'm probably not quite as enamored with it as much as you guys are, but I still have a soft spot for it. For a Gun Survivor sequel, it was nice to see the production values had been stepped up a notch, and as you've said, the experimental blend of first and third person worked pretty well, I thought, and the ship setting at the time was pretty unique. The Spencer Rain worked well as a creepy location. Story-wise, I thought the game was fine. It was the first title to take us beyond the 1998 timeline, and it refrained from using established characters, so it did make the universe feel bigger in that regard. And I've always liked the setting of Umbrella trying to rebuild behind the scenes and using this ship to showcase its new products to clients from around the world, and the ship was untraceable by the authorities. I thought that was a really cool concept. But what lets the game down for me is ultimately the lack of characters, an uninspired and frankly weird villain in Morpheus, and just a lot of really rather bland BOWs. And the game just feels really empty at times. And if you think, the plot essentially is a race against time to stop T-virus missiles from being launched against major cities of the world, there just feels like there's no sense of urgency or tension to the game. And like I said earlier, Dead Aim, it's a strange beast. It just feels like there's not really a lot going on. But that being said, I'm still quite fond of it.
It's got there's certainly something about it. I think, Rob, I think your point is quite true. It's hard to convey that general disappointment that people were feeling at the time. Resident Evil was a PlayStation franchise. At least it felt like it, and then for it to suddenly first go to Dreamcast, admittedly, as a sequel, and then, it's coming back, that's okay. Oh, by the way, you're not getting this awesome-looking remake. And you're not getting the prequel to this awesome little remake. And by the way, Resident Evil 4 is going to be GameCube. You were like, oh, and then Survivor 2. Like, oh gosh.
Yeah, and then it was Survivor 2, and then there was a delay. There was nothing for like a year, and then we get Outbreak and Dead Aim.
For me, I mean, it was. I distinctly remember getting excited about Dead Aim just because it all felt quite new, and because Resident Evil 4 was still a way off and 0 was a prequel, it kind of it didn't really progress the storyline. I wasn't expecting 0 to progress the storyline too much, and it probably didn't. So with Dead Aim, we're fast forwarding to 2002, dizzying period of time. And it did feel like we were going forward, and then the kind of build up was quite nice. The Capcom website kept getting updated with all the BOWs, and it was still T-virus, and it was still quite nice. We had two tyrants, with Blob, we had all sorts going on. And I said when I played it, I was just blown away, and I remember being blown away at being able to blow away a zombie with that critical hit analysis. I just remember getting the first one, and the zombie just being slammed against the wall in one of the kind of dormitory bedroom things, and the blood just spearing down the wall. I thought, this is peak gaming.
Yes, Nick.
It is total nonsense. It is total nonsense, and it is probably the last game I think I have nostalgia for. And it's odd because it's probably just as action heavy, really, as say Resident Evil 4. But it gets away with it because it's not Resident Evil 4. If you know what I mean, it is a spin-off. It's not supposed to be taken as seriously, and I don't know. I think John's right. I do have nostalgic views for it. Absolutely.
I do think the fact that I think quite a few of us were enamoured for it as well, because it was like I know you had the outbreaks, and that's was a final hurrah in its own way anyway, with the sort of classic camera angles and whatnot to a sense. But this was like a modern spin on that gameplay, the same way Resident Evil 4 was. But crucially, this was one of the last titles that had zombies in it for a while. And I think that's what enamoured quite a few people to it, because and of course the hunters as well.
Yes.
These were two big staple, enemies that were going to take an extremely lengthy hiatus after this year, and Outbreak File 2, of course. But once these sort of little trio of games were done, that was kind of it for zombies until the Chronicles games. Yep. And even then, it's not even really in the sort of context and capacity that people were wanting. An on-rail shooter wasn't your classic zombie experience. You don't get your classic shambling zombie experience in an on-rail shooter, do you? So, when was after Dead Aim and the Outbreaks, when was the last time zombies became a staple enemy? It'd be probably talking 6, aren't you?
I think we are.
And I know that's a very small minor point, but zombies are a big thing in this series. I remember the hysteria when there was the announcement that RE4 was not going to have zombies and not going to have a virus. How can this be Resident Evil anymore? People cried.
Yes, don't think the modern discussions that you get on Twitter about this isn't Resident Evil on anything new. This isn't.
Absolutely, I think that's why we're so sort of nonchalant about it, aren't we?
Yes. So we've touched upon the kind of gameplay legacy in the sense we had this unique hybrid system of being able to switch between first and third person view on the fly. The idea being that you explored in third person around Spencer Rain predominantly, and then load up into first person when battle ensued. Something which, of course, Gaiden did as well, but perhaps not as successfully as Dead Aim. Another boat-themed game with hybrid options there. And this was a bit, you could tell it was a bit more arcadey, because you kind of got those little bars on the side if there was a zombie to your left or right. But it certainly moved and felt better than perhaps Survivor 1 did. And I want to, before we go to the guys, Sean, do you want to talk about the way you move, because the kind of controls, and John mentioned it as well, the controls of this game, I have to say, going playing back on it does take a little bit of getting used to.
It does, yeah.
It's not. I don't quite have muscle memory like I do for the for the standard tank controls, and especially in first person when you've played a lot of 7 and 8, you're expecting the controls to perhaps be akin to the RE system, but you forget how good the RE engine is so certainly in first person mode. Dead Aim, little bit janky, Rob says that as well. So
yeah, the game is total jank. And depending on any control system you use, there is some flaws and quirks. If you want to play it with the G-Con 2, then you get a very nice sort of hybrid. You move around with the D-pad on the back, and you can, obviously when you pull the trigger, you go into first person, and you've got all the joy and ease of a light gun shooter. And it works pretty well. The problem is, there is a sidestep mechanic, a strafe mechanic, if you will, and the G-Con doesn't allow you to really do that whilst also aiming and shooting. It's a very strange, bizarre system. The mouse setup's quite similar as well. If you plugged a mouse into your PlayStation 2, the game would recognise it and you could use a mouse to shoot, but you would need to use a controller in your other hand to be able to move around. And again, because you don't have two hands on the controller, you're still kind of limited to that tank control movement, the forward, back, rotate left, rotate right. However, if you use a DualShock 2, or if you're emulating, an equivalent, it does have very, very loose faux modern shooter controls, provided you press and hold it's like the stealth button, which is assigned to L2 or left trigger. And once you do that, once you go into first person mode with your R1 or right bumper, depending on what control you're using, when you're in first person mode, as long as you hold that stealth button and you use your dual analogs, the left analog stick will do what it does in a modern, any kind of Call of Duty, Gears of War, or anything. So your left analog will move you forward, back, and strafe you left and right, and the right analog will rotate left and right and it will also aim. The problem is there's no up-down, there's no like y-axis to your aiming, so it's very clunky, because what the up-down part is on your right analog is you're just moving a crosshair up and down, which feels a bit unintuitive, but as long as you can get your head around it, it's as close to like modern controls as you will have in a title. More modern, ironically, than like Resident Evil 5 would have some 6 years later, but it is hard to get your head round at first. This is why, of all the control methods, I actually do recommend using the DualShock 2. Because as fun as it is as a light gun game, I don't think it's quite as cohesive as it wants to be, because you are limited with that lateral movement that like sidestepping and strafing allows, and that can only really be done effectively with a DualShock 2. We used a bit of a hybrid when we did the stream the other night, if anyone was watching. I actually played through most of the game using a controller, because and I tried to sort of highlight how simple like the Pluto battles are, or the Morpheus battle with the charged particle rifle is, when you can, use the pillars to, create line of sight issues between you and Morpheus and stuff. And you can only really do that with a controller. But then for the final boss, where you're basically just shooting a teleporting head on a blob, we switched to mouse controls and just completely trivialized that battle. There's a lot of options you can go for, and if anybody is curious and wants to know about how to set them up, just hit me up on Discord or Twitter and I'll point you in the right direction.
That's really useful, yes, and there's lots of tips, because the whack-a-mole end boss is quite a challenge, even even in the easier difficulties. I know when the game came out that the GunCon was properly advertised and for this title, because if anyone played Survivor 1 with the GunCon 1, GunCon 45, I think GunCon 1.
45, yeah.
GCOM, thank. Now, that wasn't available in America, but if you played the English version, it was utterly tripe playing it with the GunCon. And so, America, you have not missed out on Survivor playing it with the original GunCon, because you had to shoot to move. And so
you had to hold certain triggers down to turn, because the control was just a gun with buttons.
Yeah.
Whereas the G-Con 2 has a D-pad on the back, which is why it was able to work with games. When I say work in air quotation marks, with other games like Dead Aim.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the GunCon 2, as Rob says, you've got the kind of D-pad on there, and it was one of my first memories of university. It was quite ironic. I turned up at uni, and I heard some bang, 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 bang. I was like, what's going on? And someone had their door open, and they were playing with the GunCon, playing Dead Aim. And I thought, oh my god! Someone. Firstly, you don't meet many Resident Evil fans back in Deer, and for someone to be playing Dead Aim, I thought that was pretty cool. To be playing Dead Aim with the GunCon, I thought was really cool, and I had never seen it. And yeah, we had a brief play. That was my only real flirtation with the GunCon. But it's an interesting mechanic. It is better with a GunCon, but it's still not perfect. Did anyone else get to play it in the time?
Yeah, I used I got the G-Con. I rented. I think I rented out something else. I had Dead Aim. I purchased the game, and then I rented out something else that had the G-Con with it, and thought, oh, I might as well have a try at Dead Aim while I've got the gun. Yeah, you say it's easier. It is, and it's also not, if that makes sense. Like, certain elements are much easier to do, like the shooting obviously is more precise as long as you set it up correctly, but it's still quite clunky going from shooting to exploration with the gun. It's just one of those things. There was no way either system was going to be right using the gun. Because even though, as I said, it has this D-pad on the back, it's not exactly the most easy position. You have to, like, put the gun, like, aim the gun down almost in order to use the D-pad. And I guess the idea is that you mimic the going from third person to first person is mimicking the idea of going, when you're in third person, I put the gun down and I'm using the D-pad and I only use the trigger to action things. And then when I aim up, I change the direction to first person and I'm shooting. But in theory, it sounds great and it should work well, but it's not quite perfect. But it definitely makes, like, especially that final fight, like a cakewalk compared to like using a controller, which is just unbearable.
It is tough. Batman, what about you? DualShock?
I think I'd missed out on too much. I was just happy to use the controller.
And it's a shame, though. It's a shame that, I'd love to say to people, grab a GunCon and have a go yourself. But due to the unique way modern televisions function, The use of light guns is now very much a dying art. There are some, because I watch a couple of video reviews, there's a lot of very dedicated people trying to bring them back using different methods on HD TVs. But it is something, it's very hard to replicate, because the whole point of these is that they use they use the tubes of the CRT in the back to copy the light. I don't know how it works, but it's very.
I think my understanding is it's the trigger sends a pulse signal that's red directly pointing at which part of the screen, which reads back to the gun, which tells it where it was pointing on the screen. It is quite complicated, but it essentially uses part of the light diodes to figure out where the bounce back is. Some clever clocks came up with it, and unless you've got a CRT floating around in your house, it's and a gun con. Ironically, I have a lot of PS1 gun games, and I have no gun GCOM 1 or 2, which I really should probably try and find and pick up, because I do have an old CRT that would be quite fun to blast.
Yes,
crack out.
Some classic games. Okay, so that's kind of like talking about some of the kind of various options that you can play when you're playing this game. But otherwise, as I said, most people will be picking up the picking up the DualShock and playing it normally. It controls relatively normally, I suppose, to some of the classic REs. It's just, it takes a bit of getting used to. Generally speaking, you're not going to be moving. It is a kind of same sort of scenario. It's point, stop, shoot. You can move in first person, as Sean has kind of said, but generally don't. So yeah, it can be a bit, as you said, janky.
If I want to put it in an ideal world, the gun is perfect for the shooting part. The controller is perfect for the exploration part, but neither does the other thing correctly 100%. So if you have the controller, the shooting's not particularly great, and if you have the gun, then the shooting's great, and the controlling of the regular exploration is not the greatest. So it's like you kind of almost it would be almost better if you had two controllers to do it. One gun, one.
I think that's a perfect encapsulation of the issues that you're facing. Neither perfect. Nice idea. Nice. We don't talk a lot about this usually on the podcast, but this game, because it's on the PlayStation 2, is a bit like the kind of Outbreaks, really. It's slightly lost to time, and Capcom don't really acknowledge Dead Aim much. So if it's a game you're interested in playing, you don't really have many options other than picking up a PS2 and finding Dead Aim, which thankfully isn't too much of a challenge. But as you said, when you plug in a PS2 into your modern TV, even if you've got a component cable, which is going to bring it up to glorious 480i or or 576i or 480. Actually, it does do it in 60 hertz. You can play it in 60 hertz, which is quite nice. It doesn't look as good as it could graphically because you're on HD TVs. So emulation has become a bit of a way of playing it. And I wanted to ask Sean, because obviously Sean's our streamer for a lot of these things. Dead Aim was historically quite a hard game to emulate, and it took a long time for the clever busybodies that were able to get it going. How have you found emulation for it, Sean?
So for people who are unaware, the sort of most well-known and well-used emulator is PC SX2. It's a very, very powerful emulator and can do the majority of PS2 stuff with relative ease on most modern systems now. There is some caveats to that, and Haunting Ground, just for an example, is one of those sort of classic Capcom titles that still to this day doesn't really quite run 100% as it would on native hardware. And Dead Aim was another one. Capcom must have some tricky engines. It's not been too bad, but it's a little bit demanding, and it creates strange, because I think the game runs in a very quirky resolution. I actually don't know what resolution it runs in, but if you just try and run it like on a default setting, you get strange lines that run down the screen if you try and upscale the resolution to anything beyond its sort of native resolution. One of the perks of having an emulator is the fact that you can force higher resolutions on classic games and make them potentially look amazing. So when you try and do that with Dead Aim, you just get some strange visual quirks, and it's not always that hot. Later builds and whatnot do allow you to tick a few settings and can get it running in 1080p and beyond, up to 4K, and looking pretty good. The game's presentation, just down to how it has always been made, is always a little bit fuzzy, so even if you really do crank it up to 4K, it's always going to have a lot of softness to it, and that's perfectly natural. But the key thing is to get rid of these strange black lines that appear, vertical black lines that literally run down the image. and can totally ruin it. And you get around it just through clicking a setting. And again, if anyone is struggling with it, just hit me up and I'll try and help you and talk you through it. But you can have a relatively smooth experience now on reasonable hardware. My PC is an 11-year-old Alienware. It can still run it in 60 frames a second, so it's decent now. And crucially, the emulator can emulate the mouse. Whether you want to try and make the your PC mouse, mimic the G-Con, or just simply emulate a mouse, that's quite easy to do. You just need a couple of plugins, which sound all complex to some people, but emulation's one of those things that it's intimidating at first when you see the wealth of possibility that it offers, but once you sort of get into it, it's really not that bad. And as long as you've got someone that can help you and talk you through it, Dead Aim is very achievable on most people's PCs these days. It's arguably the definitive way to do it. Well, it's the only way you can do it if you don't have a PS2 kicking about. And this is the sad thing about Sony's approach to backwards compatibility, is the fact that Dead Aim is absolutely unavailable unless you have a PlayStation 2 in your house, which is which is a rant for another time. But it's poor. It's really poor.
And prices are only going up on these PS2 games, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Survivor, Code Veronica aside, but that's available. But Survivor 2, Dead Aim, Outbreak File 1 and 2, prices are starting to bump up for these games as they.
I mean, I don't want to put any controversial statements out on our very leveled and easygoing podcast, but I would not condemn anybody seeking emulation to play this game, because I have very passionate views about games such as this and the Outbreaks being consigned to hardware that is 23 years old now. It seems preposterous to me that you cannot play these games unless you literally keep this hardware kicking about. I'm very fortunate in my house. I have a room I can dedicate to classic systems and things like that, so I still have all of mine. I've never really got rid of any of my old consoles, but I appreciate, with things that, I'm very lucky to have that, and that's fine. So the only other option, if you don't have that, is to emulate, and we live in a world now where I don't condemn anybody to do that, because otherwise these titles get lost to time, and it seems ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a big shame. It's a big shame. That does bring us on nicely, actually, to because you're talking about some of the softness of the emulation, sort of softness of the images, the general locations, because I think that's important. That that can also kind of bring us into the storyline as well. So in Dead Aim, there's only 2 locations really, albeit they do vary across different levels. So you've got the wonderful Spencer Rain, which, as the name implies, is named after everyone's favourite megalomaniac. It's his ship, but it's not part of the Paragus line.
What, Reina Campo, Nick?
Reina Campo, yes, her from the films, Michelle Rodriguez.
No, I didn't realise the tie-ins were that deep. That's impressive.
The Spencer Rain is not part of the Queen's, the Paragus lines of ships, but this is a privately owned cruise liner that sails around the world, and it's quite impressive, actually. It obviously it lacks a lot of the detail that you'd later see on the Queen Dido and the Queen Semiramis and the Queen Zenobia and things like that, but it has something about it, and this is something that when I was replaying in preparation for this podcast, it's so hard to describe. It reminded me of the original Spencer Mansion. I'm not talking about the remake Mansion, which is beautifully detailed. I'm talking about the original 1996 Mansion. When you play that game, there is something eminently wrong with it. With the mansion, and that's part of its charm, because it is a facade. And this game, it just reminds me of it. And it's probably down to the kind of reused assets, if you like. There's lots of corridors, and the walls all have that kind of just white, half white paint, half dodgy wallpaper, which is very prevalent in the original Spencer Mansion. And you have weird corridors that go nowhere that are probably used as kind of secret loading areas for the next bit. Something that Revelations would do with the turny wheel things on the doors, but they probably use those corridors. And we on the stream we look back going, what is the point of this corridor? This would not be appropriate on a normal cruise liner, and that's exactly how you feel when you're playing, the original game. From Resident Evil. Where's the bathrooms and all this? What's this corridor? Why, Why is there a random greenhouse here? It's all designed to make you feel that slightly bit uneasy, and I think the Spencer Rain is like that. Yes, it's got a lot of recognisable bits, but it all seems a bit. There's a bar there because there has to be, and and it is all shielding the cool bits in the basement area, which is the presentation room. What it's really there for. I don't know. I don't know if I'm looking too much into it, possibly, but it does have that allure of it's not quite right as a boat. I'm not sure if anyone else shares that view.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I know GT is unfortunately not able to be with us tonight, but one of the things he always likes to compare it to is The Shining, which gives you a very. I can see where he's coming from because you have these quite sort of strangely well lit corridors that go on for almost infinity, and they're often empty with just the sort of groaning and the creaking of the ship as your only company. It for a survivor game does create a very exceptional experience, very unique to the rest of the series. Until I guess Revelations came along. Yeah, certainly for the time it felt a bit fresh for Resident Evil. I think boats have been overdone to a fault in the series since, but certainly when Dead Aim came out, the setting of a boat it did give a sense of sort of claustrophobia and but at the same time that sort of strange false uneasiness that the original mansion gave, where it looks kind of normal, but it's almost a location that's frozen. There feels like there should be more to it. And even the zombies go through it like kind of wind up toys. Like there's just something deeply unnatural about the normality of it, if that makes any sense.
Batman, do you agree? Do you think or do you think it's just gameplay? Limitations of the system. Oh, this is they designed to make it look like a boat, or do you think there's a bit more thought about how they were going to present it?
I'm not sure, to be honest. You're right. The geography is a bit. It never really stood out to me. I can't say when I was playing through it, it took me out of the experience. I just put it down to maybe little gameplay quirks. It is a budget title, so there was a lot of repeated textures, a lot of mirrored rooms. But I found the location fine overall. I particularly liked the sort of below deck areas once you use the valve handle and get down into sort of the depth. I thought the layout of the ship made sense for as far as I was concerned.
Rob, what about you?
It's a bit of both. I think for me, like the bits of the ship that are definitely a sort of thing you would see on sort of maybe a grand cruise liner, but then there are areas where it's just like filling out the map and repeated textures, as John alluded to, and just things that don't really make a lot of sense. The layout wasn't as well thought out as perhaps other boats in the franchise history, but there are bits to that obviously make sense, and maybe it's just the focus of gameplay and getting from point A to point B and the things that you need to do and collect were focused more than the layout. And I guess if you're equating that to the original game, perhaps that feels similar in that respect, that it's built around its puzzles and its points of keys and all that sort of stuff.
Well, I think that's the impression that I got. As I said, whether it was intentional, I don't know. But it's something that I just got that impression. And as John said, I really like some of the areas as well. Like the kind of bedrooms are really cool, and it's just nice picking up files from from like the crewman about I've been on the ship 20 days now, and he's writing a letter to to his brother or something, and then paranoia kind of sets in on a few. I heard some things going on. It was a bit of a callback to, or at least it is now, to to that kind of slow build up to chaos that was unfolding. So I did like that. And yes, the underground parts or the the below decks area is quite nice. And leading to the kind of key focal point in terms of the storyline, at least, was the presentation room, because the whole point of the Spencer Rain was that Umbrella was moving its operations off land, offshore, and they were selling new BOWs to prospective clients on ships like the Spencer Rain. And you can go into this kind of presentation room that is exactly that. It's almost like there's rows of seats there, and then there's a kind of placard where someone would stand up, and then there's like biotubes behind them where they would show the latest stock to be sold to to clients. And I think that's one of the coolest rooms in the series, really, because you never really see that side of Umbrella. I'm trying to think on the top of my head. We know they do this, and we know they sell it. We see it with to the Sacred Snakes in Dark Side Chronicles. We know they sell to the US government and other shady corporations. But this is the first time you've actually seen that illegal side of things in practice, or at least close to as practice as you can get. So I really appreciated that. It was just, again, that kind of unnerving. What's it hiding? And that's the kind of bulk of where the Spencer Rain is going, and the importance of it. I just think there was a bit of a missed opportunity because it does mention it in some of the files, but also in the playing manual of the game. They don't emphasize enough from a storyline point of view the importance of the people on board the Spencer Rain, because the manuals and the files talk about famous celebrities are on board, Umbrella executives are on board, terrorists, government officials from all over the world are on board because they're looking into the development of the TG virus, which was Umbrella must have put the memos out. We've got this. You're going to want this. And so everyone came on board on this secret ship, to see what was going on, and then it'd be attacked. It would have been nice, and I think John, you'll probably agree with that, because obviously you focus on the storyline a lot. How cataclysmic that could have been, and if we'd had a few more files, they could have linked it in with RE2, the X Files, which talks about like the vice president, Joel Allen, I think his name is, or we could have Christina Henry could have been there. Perhaps a couple more name drops as to real big cheeses, and equally RE5 could have mentioned it as well. Something like that. But it's a bit of a missed opportunity there.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It would have been nice to have a few more files written from the perspective of these high-end clients who were here to buy things. It would have just, I think, raised the stakes a bit more. And like you said, a few name drops there that only sort of hardcore fans would probably recognise, but it still would be very nice. And it sort of goes back to my earlier point of the game feeling very empty and the lack of characters. I think it would have been nice just to have a few more NPCs running around, a few survivors, just to sort of help sink in more the story they're trying to tell, because that's the problem, isn't it? It's a lot of Resident Evil games set in the aftermath of what's happened, the mansion, we go there 2 months after the original Biohazard. Raccoon City, we're there a week after things kicked off. And it's a similar situation here, but the environmental storytelling is so strong in those numbered titles that you can really imagine what's gone on. And Dead Aim, like you say, it's a bit harder to put that together because a lot of the environments are so empty. The presentation room is probably the strongest piece of environmental storytelling in the game, I think. That and the cutscene of Bruce walking through the deserted island later on. But yeah, just a few more files written from the perspective of these clients, and maybe just an NPC, or you come across a Marvin type character who's dying in the corner who could tell you a bit more about what's gone on. That sort of thing, I think, would have just helped solidify the story a bit better.
It is worth pointing out that there is no written mention in the game that this is an auction.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't even know where that officially comes from as such. It's just more hypothetical, linking toward other things at the time, isn't it? Other supplement material that that mentions that these auctions are done on ships and things. And
yeah, I think a couple of the files mention that things like the TG virus variant and the Tyrant have been modified for presentation, and obviously in the presentation room you can see like BOW storage pods and things. So again, the environmental storytelling there works to its advantage. But yeah, you're right. It could have been elaborated on a bit better. I'm
just pleased to say that this game clearly inspired Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom final act.
Yeah, that is a horrible film, but it's a guilty pleasure of mine. And every time I watch that auction scene, it does remind me of Dead Aim. Every single time.
But that absolutely, that is that's what we're dealing with, and that's been alluded to throughout the series. What's the point of the T virus? What's the point of because that with RE5, we know that the T virus wasn't even Spencer's goal. He didn't really give too much of a hoot about it. It was more to do with him trying to fulfill his his godlike persona and find a virus where he will rule over. He needed the T virus to, bring in the big bucks. Okay, fine. And then, they made Umbrella to sell, other pharmaceuticals to, to keep it all legitimate. well, who's he selling into? Who's buying all this shit? Who wants a licker? Who wants a hunter? Well, and the game's kind of built up to it, but there's not many examples of where we actually see that happening, and so I found it quite useful. But I do think it was a slight missed opportunity to have a bit more detail. And you are right, John. That there's only 3 characters in the game. That's quite poor. I mean, Survivor 1 had more.
Yeah, and you could say the same about Resident Evil 0. I think one of the faults in that game is it's obviously Bravo team are kicked to one side, but once you sort of get into the meat of the storyline with Rebecca and Billy, there's no one else involved at all, apart from that one instance where you run into Enrico, where, given the geography cock-up, you'd rather not run into him.
Yes.
Imagine if there was just one extra file in the game, which was like, I don't know, a client list or a price list, where we could see who was bidding for what. How much is a hunter worth? How much is a pack of liquors worth? What companies, what countries are bidding for the T-virus? That sort of thing would have massively raised the stakes and really expanded the danger, really, of the universe and just made everything much bigger. I think, that was a missed opportunity.
What about you, Rob? The location of Spencer, the Spencer Rain itself. Any particular highlights for you based on what we've been saying?
I mean, this is the thing. I think when I remember playing through it, was that I just accepted it was like some sort of luxury cruise liner, and like the lore stuff kind of just at the time. I don't know if it was my interest, but it kind of just started to. I didn't pay as much attention to it as I perhaps normally had, and I think it was at the time it was a lull in my interest because I was like my life was in a weird, rapidly changing state for a couple of years between kind of 03 and 05, and it took a while to kind of get settled down. So it was one of those cases that it wasn't until later when I went back and replayed it, and even now I'm just like I just remember more of it as an encompassing whole of a location rather than anything specific. And even watching the replay last week, I remembered each bit, but I don't remember anything specific that kind of leaped out at me the same way as it has for you guys. You've all made relatively good points, but it's like
I think new players will play on it. I think what we've said is probably accurate. There is a lot of reused textures, and as I said, I could be stretching a little bit, but that was a genuine impression I had at the time about. I thought this is quite similar to the Spencer Mansion, that type of thing. And perhaps it wasn't intentional. Who knows? And it probably doesn't help that the Queen Zenobia is a beautiful ship, and the graphical fidelity of that is so much better, and and the rooms vary quite significantly. Kind of the kind of back rooms and all the chef catering areas. Then you've got the grandiose rooms with all the kind of fog at the bottom. Then you've got the swimming pool areas, and then the casino. It's all very lots of different levels, and it all looks stunning. The only variant really on the Spencer Rain between the lower grounds and the top, you've got the kind of Seven Seas bar, which is the kind of pub / casino area. That's probably and even that has that kind of soft grainy look to it. It all kind of, I mean, it works within the game, but I think if you've played Revelations and then play Dead Aim, you'll be a bit like, oh, this is a bit dull.
Yeah, I would say so, but I don't think the Spencer Rain is too bad. I mean, we've obviously got to remember the limitations of the time with it being a budget title. I mean, from what I can recall, there's still recognisable first, second and third class passenger sections. There's the Seven Seas bar, as you've mentioned. There's the Grand Ballroom. There's the atrium sort of spire thing that runs down the heart of the ship where Bruce loses his radio. There's the promenade decks. So, there's nothing in there that makes it too unbelievable per se. And
no.
And like you said, the bottom areas of the ship are much more interesting. I think the sort of maintenance areas and the crew berths and things like that.
One of the things that I just want to quickly touch upon, we mentioned it in the stream as well, to do with the Spencer Rain, is this is one of the only times in the series, possibly the only time in the series, where a thought has been given to the actual animated zombies still holding a semblance of themselves, which is something obviously Romero covers quite a bit with his commentary of consumerism and things, and obviously Edgar Wright riffed off that with Shaun of the Dead. But like, you do get what you imply to be a husband and wife at the on the end of the boat, still stood together even in their reanimated form. When you go into the Seven Seas bar at some point in the game, there's still zombies loitering around the bandits. and they just sort of stood there aimlessly, like the zombies of the Romero era, when they're just sort of still shambling around the haunts that they used to do, as though there's still something in their brain that, you know, ties them to these things. And I just found it fascinating that of all the games in the series that kind of does this, it's actually Dead Aim. Like some small amount of thought was given to like where we're going to place these zombies, and it's just something simple, and it's there.
Yes, the Jack Rose zombies at the end.
Yeah.
you sneak up on them and then put them out of their misery. But it's because they do loiter around in the bar, don't they? With the
They're all just
the machines.
Bandit,
The machines. Yeah. It's quite cool. So let's have a quick overview then of the general storyline that's going on. So this ties in before we get onto the big island. So we'll kind of let's focus on it on the Spencer Reign. So the auction's going on, and then Morpheus and his band of followers, who we don't know who they are or what they look like, they attack the Spencer Reign as a revenge for his firing by Umbrella, because he was blamed randomly for the mansion incident, which you find out a bit later on. And he's stolen some T-virus samples from the Paris lab, which is a nice little link to RE3. Because I do think in the opening video it does say the 6th laboratory somewhere. I think it does. I'm sure there was some promotional art that said 6th laboratory as it's going up. So, which is obviously where the Nemesis parasite was created. So he and his band of followers attack the Spencer Reign. They release the T-virus, or at least part of the T-virus, onto the Spencer Reign, infecting everyone, killing huge swathes of Umbrella, celebrities, and God knows what. And then Morpheus commodores the ship and takes it towards his island. That's the kind of that bit's quite simple. It's only when you get to the island you start questioning not necessarily the storyline. You follow it. Bruce and Fong Ling are sent in to stop Morpheus because Morpheus is threatening the world cities with T-virus. And it's only when you get to the island you start questioning why did he take out the Spencer Reign, because it's not entirely clear why he did this. Because on the island we learn through, and we'll talk about the island as a location in a bit. We learn through files that he has been using this island for many, many years, and he commissioned the building of the biosphere, or at least the completion of the biosphere, because I think it was started probably under Umbrella's watch. Yes, no, it was. Sorry, yes, the biosphere was completed, but he adapted it with the missile silos secretly. So Umbrella didn't know. So you do question why he needed the T-virus when he probably had quite a lot of it already on the island, because we know from the files that we've got Pluto running around since 1996. We know that we've got the Nautilus and the Torpedo Kids. They've been in the waterways for quite some time. We know the Hunter Glimmers have been in there for a while. So this was a disposal island. And they had their own labs, and you see and explore the labs, which are quite cool little labs, I have to say. It was quite a nice little area. They've clearly got facilities, and there have been absolutely no reason why they wouldn't have the T-virus. So it does seem odd that he needed to steal it from the Paris labs. Batman, can you elaborate any further, or is it a bit of a plot hole?
I mean, you could probably maybe just argue that he did it as a statement of intent, so, Umbrella would perhaps take him seriously. I think he took the ship because he wanted to get hold of the new virus, and obviously he saw the opportunity to really damage Umbrella by wiping out a lot of their top executives and customers in one foul swoop. Like you say, the T-virus was always at the island, so robbing the Paris lab I don't think was a necessity, but maybe he just did it out of arrogance, overconfidence. Unfortunately, it's not really stated. If anything, all it really does is alert the Americans and Chinese as to what he's up to. I mean, you're right about the island. It's like an old waste disposal facility where failed BOWs can sort of roam loose, and they're monitored by like a skeleton staff. The Biosphere Laboratory was sort of shut down by Umbrella. We don't know when, but it says in a file that it was a long time ago, a long time prior to the events of the game. The island was run by Morpheus in the mid-90s, who, as we know, is an eccentric individual obsessed with cleanliness and beauty. The Pluto experiment is a big failure. It escapes, it kills 5 researchers, it triggers a biohazard in 1996. A year later, a new worker is transferred to the island and is amazed about how sloppily the facility is run by Morpheus. The biohazard conditions are still there. Pluto still hasn't been captured. A lot of employees have died. And it's evident that Morpheus has absolutely no regard for the people working under him. And it's these incidents that result in Umbrella wanting to get rid of him. You've got to bear in mind that this biohazard, precedes the mansion biohazard and things like that. So it's quite a big deal for the time. And Umbrella eventually make him a scapegoat for the Arkley Mansion biohazard as an excuse to get rid of him. And obviously Morpheus is quite rightly pissed off about this and swears revenge. And then in the early 2000s, he establishes a cult of followers. Again, Nick, you're right, we don't know who these people are, unless they're just sympathisers to his cause or other embittered ex-Umbrella employees. He plans to create his own kingdom in the heart of Africa. He wants to acquire the T-virus and buy himself an army of mercenaries to overthrow local governments and work behind the scenes as like an international fixer, kind of similar to what Wesker wanted to do actually in later years. Wesker wanted to control the flow of global warfare by being in possession of not only the deadliest bioweapons but also the antivirus as well and the various cures. But that's another discussion. But Morpheus essentially wanted the T-virus to make his new little kingdom the equivalent of a nation possessing mass destruction weapons. And he chose Africa because the progenitor virus source is located there, or so that's what we all like to think. Again, it's probably nothing more than a coincidence. But at some point he returns to the now abandoned island with his followers, bringing in workers and architects, and sets up base in the abandoned biosphere and starts to convert it into a missile launching bay. By 2002, Umbrella are obviously, or Spencer I should say, is planning Umbrella's revival by using the Spencer reign to showcase new products for sale, as you've already gone into. This includes the TG virus, a new hunter and a new tyrant. And yeah, that's basically Umbrella hopes, this auction will be a success, generate some much needed income to pay for the ongoing legal costs of the Raccoon trials, keep the corporation afloat following the various lawsuits and business suspension orders. Morpheus plans to ruin all this by stealing the new virus, killing Umbrella's executives, and obviously then launching missiles from his newly converted biosphere to major population centres across the US and China if his financial demands are not met. I think he asks for $5 billion, does he, from each country? And it's this money that he'll use to fund his new endeavour in Africa. And what I quite like, actually, is because the missile silo is located underwater, it makes it very hard to attack. Should any government's military try and retaliate, you'd have to say it would be extremely difficult to guide any warheads to a seabed target, and therefore the US and China decide to send in infiltration agents instead. And that sort of sets up the base game, and then the whole Spencer Reign storyline, which you've already gone into. So there is quite a lot of stuff going on in the background. There's other things going on as well. Morpheus has a sex change or plastic surgery to retain his youthful looks. He has his followers conduct survey reports on the various creatures that are still on the island. So, there's other things going on. And then there's a second biohazard on the island, which according to the official scenario in Japanese only happens 1 month prior to the start of the game. And again, which was caused because Morpheus was just generally sloppy and didn't really care about the people working under him. So yeah, there's quite a lot going on.
As always, John, that was fascinating, fascinating, and a wonderful listen. And that last point you make is quite important because, oh my days, the discussions that I had back in the day. Why are there zombies on this island? And you think, well, it's a Resident Evil game, of course there's zombies. But actually think about it. When you look at these files, everything is kind of implied as being quite a long time ago. And it's not only that there are zombies on their island, these are zombies on fire. And another moment I will add, when I said peak gameplay, when I saw zombies on fire in Dead Aim for the first time, I was blown away. I didn't play a lot of games, I just played Resident Evil games. So I was like, wow, look at this. I thought it was incredible. So yes, there were many discussions between myself, former kind of colleague used to work with us, El Bastardo. We came up with all sorts of theories about who these flaming naked zombies were. And the fact that, as I said in the Japanese guide, or the Japanese website, says that there was another kind of outbreak, all of his followers. But does that tally up with the files? Because in some of the files he says, I've arrived. Who's he talking to? He says, I've arrived on the base, I'll now commence the plan. He puts it in a note to people.
Yeah, he's talking to his followers back on the island. I think I mentioned this when Sean did his stream. In the English version, it's not clear. It just says, "I have arrived and begun the plan." But in the Japanese, it clarifies that he's arrived on board the ship and begun his plan, which is spreading the virus. And he's basically checking in with his employees still on the biosphere. And obviously, they're busy with the missile preparations, that sort of thing.
But then, doesn't that? What about if you said that I thought all the zombie people were killed a month before then on the.
Yeah, the sort of second biohazard that hits the island is like a month before the game, and that affects all the workers on the island doing the sort of BOW survey reports and things you can read.
But not the people in the biosphere.
I think the biosphere was kind of sealed off, but then I think Morpheus must somehow betray them as well, possibly a bit like Morgan Lansdale did when he sort of released the biohazard remotely on the ship. But again, it's not really stated, unfortunately.
Before we get into the location, I think what's important, if you follow the chronology of Resident Evil, what happens after this is Umbrella's End, because this is what September 2002 Dead Aim happens. And then the next chronological event is Umbrella's End from the Chronicles games, which basically sees all of Umbrella kind of like being forced together, and everything lies on the Russian facility and Sergei's little base of operations. That's it. So there's the argument, and we'll come to it a bit later on, as to whether the importance of the Spencer Rain incident and the destruction of everyone and Umbrella's failed kind of mini revival. But as I said, John, your take's very eloquent, and just it kind of gives the impression of how important it is. I just wonder whether, when you're playing it, you don't necessarily feel that is the case.
No, you don't. That's the problem with this game. You don't really. It's not really explained just how high the stakes are. Really, when the ship goes down and you start walking through the island, you don't suddenly think, well, that's effectively the end of Umbrella there, because surely that's just killed off all the new products, all their clients, all their top executives. That doesn't really stick in your head because it's not really properly spelled out to you, which is a shame, really, because I think it is all a bit of a happy coincidence, but it is a big deal because you have to wonder, if Dead Aim was never a thing and the Spencer Rain incident never happened, would Umbrella have gone down as quickly as they eventually did? Because the Talos project and Sergei was like the last throw of the dice, and once they were dealt with, Umbrella very quickly went under then. But would that really have happened if they still had all their clients, their top customers still living and their top executives still alive? You'd probably argue that they would have survived a little bit longer, and therefore Umbrella itself might have survived a little bit longer, but we just don't know. And another problem with Dead Aim as well is it's never referenced in any other game. It's never referenced really in any other piece of supplemental material. So, it's very easy for the events of this game to just sort of be quietly swept under the rug and forgotten about.
Rob, do you think that's a bit? Yeah, it's a big shame. How important do you guys think the overall game is from a storyline point of view? Or essentially, I don't want to say, I think it's important. Are we overhyping it a little bit? Is it needed? Do you need to play it?
It's from a lore point of view.
Yeah. What do you think?
Then no. It has no overarching impact on the rest of the series. It is at best a neat little filler for the missing years. Because if you're playing a chronological playthrough, then obviously the last entry you have, even if you're doing a numbered title playthrough, you go from RE3, which is set in 1998, and then you jump 6 years. So Dead Aim is one of those games that fills that gap, if you like.
You missed Code Veronica.
Yeah, I'm just numbered titles. I'm being deliberately obnoxious here.
Not
Rob,
just with actual numbered titles as opposed to.
Because there are some people who claim that CVX is a spin-off because it doesn't have a number.
So that's just circumstances of branding at time. That 3 wasn't even supposed to be 3 and all that sort of stuff. I think anyone who's making that argument still this day and age needs to just stop.
Even including Code Veronica, you're still talking 1998 jump to 2004. So this is still a game that can fill a gap in those years, and there are that sort of 6 year period is still one of the least explored parts of the Resident Evil timeline for some baffling reason, and I don't understand why, because surely it holds the most scope for some exciting storytelling in the final days of Umbrella.
But if you read, if you read the various discussions on Discord and forums about, what led to Umbrella's downfall and the dissolution of Umbrella, it's very rare that people mention the events of Dead Aim as a contributing factor. But how different would things be if the game was exactly the same, the content was exactly the same, the only change was you swap Bruce and Fong Ling for Leon and Ada? How then would the game suddenly jump up in importance for a lot of people?
Some people would be saying it's the real RE4 because it deals with Umbrella, it's got zombies in, and
It didn't make our list in episode 67 of essential titles to play in preparation of Village.
Because again, it's not. Yeah.
a travesty. But should it?
It's not. Like I'm gonna answer now because I was going to before, but it's not, because the only reason you can lie a line between this and say the Umbrella's End is because Umbrella's End came out afterwards, and they needed to tell that story. If that didn't exist, this would just be an interesting offshoot that explains a little bit more of Umbrella's downfall, but didn't really give you an answer either way. So it's not really that important either. It's only when you start trying to piece all the bits together, and then even then, it's just another event. Like there could have been several of these events, and they'd all contribute the same factors. It's standalone. It's
people know how much I love this game, and even I'm, I will concede it is at best in terms of the wider lore a footnote. That's all it is. It's just a single entry in a timeline. It's Wesker's extra report, where he talks about ships.
That's a good point, just to bring up on what Batman says. It has never been mentioned in any game. Bruce does not get a mention in anything, and Wesker's extra report, which came with Umbrella Chronicles, as Sean says, it mentions that post Raccoon City, Umbrella took some of their activities offshore, using ships, and there you go. And everyone was like, "That's it. That's the Dead Aim reference," because it's a Survivor title. There's always been, is it canon debate about it. That's existed as soon as Survivor 1 came out. Well, this isn't canon. It's not Resident Evil 4 or whatever it needed to be at that time. But yeah, Survivor's been mentioned far more times than Dead Aim. And Wesker's extra report is tenuous at best. But I think it did get mentioned in Dark Side Chronicles. They didn't in the Inside of Dark Side Chronicles book, which mentions quite a lot of things as an important, as a title, as a canonical title.
Yeah, I mean, there's a multitude of timelines that Capcom have published in various books and other materials, and that particular one is the only time the events of Dead Aim are referenced, which is interesting, because obviously Sheena Island, Biohazard, that got a major shout out in Resident Evil 0, and it's been mentioned in a few other things like archives, etc. But the Spencer Rain incident has been completely overlooked. I think one tenuous link we all made at the time when the game was brand new was this, because it's not mentioned in game, is it? I think it's mentioned on the back cover of the box, that Bruce works for US Stratcom anti-Umbrella Pursuit and Investigation Team. And I think we all said, this is the underground umbrella organisation that is mentioned in Wesker's report. It's the organisation that Leon and Barry work for. And, people have made the link as well that Bruce's equipment is pretty much one-to-one for the stuff Leon has in Resident Evil 4 as well. So I remember a lot of discussion about that at the time when the game was new.
I've always been interested about that design choice, because some people might say it's reusing whatever, but it's not a reused texture. It's an original texture that just happens to look pretty much the same sort of outfit that they were going for at the same time planning that version of 4. So it's a very interesting choice, and there must be some reasoning behind it.
You've touched on it as well earlier, just the mention of Africa. And again, distinct memories of all roads lead to Africa. At this time of the timeline, we just had Zero come out, and we'd had those Billy Cohen flashbacks in Africa. We had Dead Aim talking about the symbol of beauty or whatnot, symbol of power is in Africa. And then we had RE4 come out, and then I think we had talk about RE5, and that was going to be set in Africa, and it was like, this is where the game, this is where the series is heading. Dead Aim's going to be, front and center of RE5. This is what we talk about,
That's-
ladies and gentlemen.
But the thing is, Nick, that's not how they play in these games.
No,
They
it's
just
not.
make them as they go, and so it just so happened that there was 2 games that happened to make references to Africa, and they decided on a setting for 5, and it just happened to be Africa. It's why it doesn't connect the ways you expect it to. It's
Yes.
because it wasn't thought of those ways. It was just a decision that was made.
But
They
that
went
didn't
with
stop us,
with a
Rob.
light and dark. Well, exactly. But they went with a light and dark concept and thought Africa seemed like a good place for it. That's
And let's not forget the obvious fact that the Billy Cohen flashbacks in Zero had nothing to do with Biohazard. It was purely an army coup of some description, wasn't it? And him
Yeah.
disobeying orders. So it had absolutely. But as I said, that didn't stop us.
zero thing to do with Umbrella.
I think if we'd known in 2003 the progenitor virus was in Africa, we would have been all over this.
Yes. Yeah. But then it was.
Retroactively, it works beautifully, though.
Yeah, it does. It does.
As we talked about in the stream, the symbol of power being in Africa, and now we know that the garden is there. It's beautiful. It's a perfect. It's one of those rare moments in the series where a retcon actually works, and you go, I know it wasn't intended at the time in 2003, but my God, it's good, isn't it?
It's a purely accidental retcon. Yeah.
Okay, well, we talked about it, but I want to go back to it. The island location, which I lovely named Benthic Island, simply because of the Benthic Labs, Seabed Labs. Seabed Island sounds rubbish, so I called it Benthic Island, and so I've called it on the website because it's our website. I can name it what I like. So, Benthic Island is a lovely little location. It's just a shame, and it's all underground, and we don't see it. But for fleeting seconds, a fleeting 30-second cutscene where Bruce is scaling the rocks, Chris Redfield style, and then looking through this village of despair almost, and the music and the sea, and you're like, this looks like one of the best locations in the world. I can't wait to it. Oh no, we're going down the lift.
Here's some grey tunnels for you.
It's
In
grey
the dark.
tunnels.
I
And
must
this,
say,
Yay!
I must say that, and I probably talked about it on my first ever episode of this, but that cutscene of Bruce just briefly walking through the abandoned buildings is one of my personal highlights of the series. I think
So
for
good.
that sort of 60 seconds, I am in absolute bliss. I just think it's phenomenal. I think that that direction-wise, it's amazing. The music is incredible, and it's a feeling that as you say, Nick, you want to play it. And then you just shove down into the sewers, and it's not until actually Resident Evil Revelations 2 that you get some idea of what exploring abandoned locations would be like in that kind of context. And this will not be the last time Revelations 2 comes up tonight.
No, and I think you're spot on. As that you get this kind of weird, almost like a quasi-American town that's been. You've got the big water tower with the Paul Anderson-esque umbrella logo, right? Heart and center of the water tower. But it's dilapidated. It's fallen to ruin, and you go, "Ooh, what's going on there?" Was this the facade? This is what we want to explore. This is what we want, and it's just taken away from you. But then, as you say, Revelations 2, you get the abandoned fishing town at the beginning. Oh, that's quite weird. And then, but later in the game with Barry, you get that entire town. And absolutely, it invokes that same imagery of.
Absolutely.
Oh, I loved that part in Revelations 2. I thought it was fantastic, and and it's certainly perhaps again another coincidental callback, perhaps. But it is a shame that we don't get to explore Benthic Island overground more.
Dull and boring, and very depressing.
Yeah, the problem is with the sewers and the subsequent, I don't even know what you want to call it. It's like an expanded sewer section before you get to the Pluto fight, but they're all just basically copy-paste locations that exist to pad the game. Which I say, almost ironically, because the game itself is barely an hour-long experience. But this is the point in the game where you can clearly see the budget restrictions kick in, because you just have endless sewer tunnels. Endless. I don't even know what to call it. Where all the flaming zombies are and the glimmer monsters are. I don't even know what you'd call that. It's just an extension of the sewer system, but what you have is, for a good sort of 10-15 minute duration, endless corridors that look the same, and it reeks of that era as well. PS2 games were notorious for doing this. You could see some budget restrictions, and although all a developer would do is just force you into many scenes of similar looking environments, just to prolong or pad the runtime.
Yeah.
Running around in the dark with the glimmers, where you could only see their eyes, was quite novel. And I think the sound design helped in a lot of these areas as well. Like I never noticed it until your stream a couple of weeks ago, but the sounds the torpedo kids make when they're sort of like wailing or crying for the that was really creepy. I can't believe I've never noticed that before.
Do you know what it bizarrely reminds me of? It reminds me of the sounds you hear through the Bradbury building in Blade Runner.
Yeah.
When Decker's walking through it, he hears these sort of almost strange meow sounds in the background. So there you go. It's not only invoked The Shining, it's invoked Blade Runner now.
That's a link I wasn't expecting.
Don't think anyone was.
Yes, no, I'd never heard that as well. I mean, I asked Sean to stop. What's that noise? It sounded like a child was screaming. And you were like, "Oh, it's the torpedo kids." That was quite weird, Okay, that brings us quite nicely then to talk about the BOWs generally in this game. And this, I think, the Spencer Reign kind of lacks a little bit of variety, because you only get the hunters and the zombies, and then one tyrant. There could have been a few more, I think. As I think I said it in a previous one. Where are the zombie seagulls, ladies and gentlemen? That would have been an ideal time to introduce zombie seagulls. It gets a little bit better on the island, but do you think the Spencer Reign's lacking a little bit of variety?
I think so, especially because of the plot of the game, and the files make a conscious effort, don't they, to explain that biohazardous cargo is being secretly transported onto the ship. So you would have thought they could have put a couple of original BOWs in there. Can't say I've got much time for the Hunter Elites, to be honest. Again, I think they just dumbed down what made the original creature so scary and so dangerous. You know, yet another Hunter variant, which I just don't think we really needed. And it's interesting as well, because Darkside Chronicles introduced the Anubis in the same chronological year, 2002. And that made a point of saying the Hunter program had essentially been scrapped by that point, because the rival company had got hold of the development data and sabotaged it. So you'd have to say the Hunter Elite was probably the very last model put into production before it was stopped. Just a bit flat for me, these Hunters, and disappointing we didn't get a couple of completely original creatures.
Yeah, and I think this is where Revelations is quite good, in that, you know, there's lots of naturally occurring BOWs on the Zenobia, isn't there? Some like the wall blisters are just, you know, mutated barnacles and things like that, aren't they? Which potentially we could have seen that happen. You know, the T virus is pretty infectious to most things. So yeah, any rat or anything on board, we could have seen something quite weird. I like the Hunter, because I think this one is particularly good. I like the fact that it's huge. I like the fact that it takes a huge amount of ammunition to actually take down as well. This ain't no silly Revelations Hunter, which is just a joke. These are powerful beings, and they've got, they're as deadly as the alphas. They've got the kind of twitch movements of the betas as well. So I just thought it's like, I could see, and they've got the kind of like frog-like appearance almost of the gammas, and I think they put a little bit of thought into that. It's no coincidence that it's got the beta twitch, and that kind of thing. So I don't know. I like them. I think they're good.
I think I don't think the animation's been lifted or anything like that, but there is notable similarities when you play Resident Evil 3 Remake. That the dodge move that the betas do in that game is incredibly similar to the Hunter Elite, and their death animation, where they kind of stretch their body to full length and writhe, is nearly exactly the same. It's almost uncanny how similar it is. And I genuinely, I'm going to say this, I genuinely don't think it's a reference or anything like that, but it's just quirky and interesting how it manages to be the same in its own way. Like I say, I don't think it's a link or anything like that, but it's just very humorous to me that two incredibly separate teams that have hit upon something that looks very similar. And if it is a reference, then I take my hat off to the RE4 developers in one of my only times I will ever do that.
Rob, anything? Well, let's broaden the scope then about just the general BOWs, on the island as well, because obviously that they get a bit more creative because it's supposed to be disposed creatures. Anything that tickled your fancy? Were you a fan of the Pluto?
The Pluto to me, it's funny, reminded me a lot of, and like literally, I think it was the year before, or the same year. Now I'm trying to remember when it was. Maybe it was the year before. It was when Silent Hill 3 came out, and they had the big bloater style enemy in it, and they looked very similar. And I remember going, "Gosh, this is very Silent Hill-ish at this point." I can't remember what the name of that enemy is. I've gone blank. But yeah, it was very similar, and it was just the fact that it was like similar movement, except the Resident Evil one moved faster. That was literally the difference, and they both were relatively sight impaired. They were more sound focused. I remember thinking there were some very big similarities between those two, and I don't know if that was intentional or not. It was just circumstantial. But no, I mean, yeah, it was. You're right. There's more variety, but the game overall is, you probably have to admit, is also generally probably lacking the most variety overall for one of these games. And as you've pointed out during the stream and alluded to a little bit before, it's just like, why are all these zombies on fire? Like, it's a bit weird.
If you look at most RE games, the actual the originals, the variety of BOWs is pretty slim pickings. It's only when you get to RE4 onwards, people now expect there to be 12 versions of the Ganado or
Yeah.
whatnot. This is one of the last games. There's only what was it, eight or nine, which is about normal.
Yeah. I feel like some of the early games maybe had like about a dozen, including all the small varieties. I think it's that same thing, like you said, like, oh, well, you could have done zombie seagulls, like that's, instead of crows. That is quite plausible. Like, there are things you probably could have added that were those little ones that you would get in the earlier games that perhaps are missing. And I think maybe it is that it's just weighted so heavily that there's not a lot of variety for like the first half or so. Realistically, like the first 60% of the game, because I think the ship really takes up 60% of the game, to be fair. Other than that, nothing really stands out. And then, like, I'm not even going to skip forward to what you're eventually going to get to, because you'll get there eventually.
I was going to talk about that. Well, I always found the Nautilus and Torpedo Kids to be an early example of gameplay bosses. This is something that I feel has littered the series for a while, where they'll put a boss just to showcase a bit of gameplay. I'm looking at the Nemesis in Remake 3. I'm looking at Ndesu, RE5.
I mean, they've always had some of those elements in places. It's not. I don't think it's fair to say it's. I mean, perhaps it got worse, but. Yeah, I know what you mean. Like enemies that are specific to an environment because they went, let's have this environment, and then designed an enemy around it.
Yes.
Or created an extension of the enemy for its ability to exist further into something because of the gameplay element. Yeah, I get what you mean. I feel like that has something that perhaps has always somewhat existed, but only became more and more apparent as the franchise went on. As they tried to come up with more variety of enemies and more interesting ways to be creative with it, because obviously the mindset is that zombies can only go so far, and certain enemies can only go so far. I mean, you could make the same argument about your namesake.
We'll chuck we'll chuck an aqua ring down there. Well, chuck a shark. Why not?
Well, I've got a shark in, exactly. So it's not. I don't think it's something that's new. I think it's just something that became more obvious.
Yes, no, I'd agree 100% of that. Pluto, of course, as you've mentioned, has the benefit of one of the best files in the entire series. One of the most horrific files of this poor criminal, which, we've a lot of history of the Umbrella taking condemned criminals, which Survivor showcased very nicely, and then performing what can only be described as one of the most horrendous procedures any kid could go under, removing eyeballs, opening up the brain. It's absolutely disgusting. Well worth checking out. But what I found interesting was that there wasn't anything particularly remarkable. We don't think about the actual person that was Pluto, the human that was Pluto, but adding something like muscular boosters had a huge impact upon the mutation that the T virus followed, which apart from a tyrant, a kind of naturally born tyrant, should you say, you never really see that again with the T virus. No one, adding almost like artificial means to a human base to see what that would do. If you know what I mean, they don't give them any other enhancers or to see how that affects. And I always found that quite interesting because the question is whether the Pluto is a tyrant, and you could say, well, it kind of is, but the best example is ironically from Resident Evil 6, the kind of Whopper C virus variant is just and that's where you kind of see these variants kind of tricking, just like a big human that's been infected with the C virus, and that's kind of enhanced that kind of natural size of it, whereas this is been done by almost like by artificial means, and it's something that you never really see in the series, at least in the early days, which you would have thought.
Well, you make an interesting link there to the tyrants, and you talked about the muscle boosters and that. It is actually a common factor for the tyrants. The tyrants are given, as well as the T virus, they're all given muscle strengthening surgeries, which is where they get the bulk from. So it's possible that Pluto was maybe an attempt at a budget tyrant in much the same way the Bandersnatch was on Rockfort Island.
Yes, that's a good point.
And it just became a sort of mishmash of parts because they were trying to. It would make sense as well with the timing of Umbrella wanting to sort of cut costs and things. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if it turned out to be, a kind of budget tyrant type creature.
Mm. Yeah, people forget that the Bandersnatch was supposed to be like a miniaturized tyrant version, but it didn't really take off. The most random, I forget about it each time, and I think again it came up on our stream. The wasp at Halbert, it's got to be the most random thing. It just suddenly, literally, just plonks in the ground. You're just walking through a room, and suddenly this queen wasp just falls on your lap, basically. Like, oh, I'm fighting a giant insect now. I always found that to be really weird, and the halberd is one of the examples of where that's an actual BOW, and so I appreciated its appearance because at some point Umbrella somewhere has decided to experiment with a wasp, which we see obviously in the original game, and they made a specific BOW and said no, this is crap, and they sent it off to the labs, but it does feel a bit out of sync though. Do you ever think that?
Yeah, definitely. It kind of felt like one of those things. Oh, we need some kind of sub boss here. So, what can we think of on the fly? It like the giant moth from Resident Evil 2. We just need like an enlarged insect. It's lost the ability to fly because it's so big and so heavy now. So it's just kind of immobile, but it spits out like a lot of its young, and yeah, it just felt kind of really random and just a bit uninspired.
The thing for me is that the thing is the whole situation is more of a missed opportunity, because if you look at this, like what you're explaining, like there's a whole bunch of these things where they rejected a whole bunch of stuff and sent them all to be disposed of. They could have had all sorts of weird random mutations and all sorts of weird enemies. But again, it's the budget of the title. It's how many enemies and how much you can throw at it, really. But yeah, there was a great opportunity there to potentially just do all sorts of weird stuff.
Right. Let's talk TG virus, and specifically the Morpheus and the Tyrant T091. So this was, again, a really nice direct follow-up from Resident Evil 2. We basically find out what happened to the G virus after Hunk retrieved it from Birkin. And there's a very clear file about what the goal of this virus was to do. By combining the T virus with the G virus, they wanted to create an electrical property to it somehow, so that when someone was infected, they would be able to create their own electrical field, which would effectively make them immune from enemy firepower. The first regent was the T091, the TG091 virus that was given to a human, and we see the T091 tyrant, which was a bit of a failure. There's not a lot going on in that tyrant. Certainly no electrical properties, which is what is deemed a failure. And interestingly, though, John, correct me, was it sent for disposal? Because it wasn't on show. It wasn't being presented, was it?
I think the Tyrant was supposed to be, but it was given the first version of the virus, the 09.1 variant, and it failed to generate the required electromagnetic field. So yeah, it was a failure in that respect. But I can only presume it was on the ship because they intended that particular specimen to go on auction. But obviously it didn't, because it failed.
I just wondered whether it was no, it wasn't. It wouldn't have been on there to be not to the island for disposal. But I like that Tyrant a lot. I'm a big fan of the T091, simply because it looks like a kind of cross between the Proto Tyrant from Resident Evil 0, and it's kind of got that G-Virus element because it's got the claws, but there's a kind of like tentacle side of things coming out, and you're like, oh, that's quite cool. And then it's horrendously gory when you fight it on the ship. It's got the heart on its back, and that's the weak spot. You start shooting that shotgun at that Tyrant, the blood, the gore is off the scale.
Yeah,
but
it's pretty cool.
So that was that was essentially a failure as a Tyrant, and then they made the 092 variant or region or whatnot, and then so this is the long-term question a lot of people had, because with the release of Umbrella Chronicles, you kind of got a bit of misinformation about 13 clones being made for the Tyrant program and whatnot, and then the development of the T virus as to who would become a Tyrant if injected with the virus. So and people saying, well, is the Tyrant 091 one of Sergei's clones? And I mean, this is all kind of retrospectively people, trying to pin some things. So the question is, why would anyone with the T092 variant, would they always become a Tyrant? Or was Morpheus one of these special people? But not necessarily the 1 in 10 million, which is what is kind of cited in Wesker's report too, because I think acceptance of the T virus was a lot higher at that point. But is Morpheus, would you still say, John, a special adapter to the virus?
It's maybe a bit of both, because I think the variant of T virus that was used to create the TG virus was, the one originally developed by Birkin through the use of Sergei's clones that made it, Tyrant compatibility so much better. So rather than, just one in every 10 million becoming a Tyrant, the chances of Morpheus becoming a Tyrant would be probably something like maybe, 1 in 50 or 1 in 100, because the compatibility rate was so much improved. And that to me is a better explanation than Morpheus just randomly being this 1 in 10 million adapter.
No, I agree, yeah. And Morpheus injects himself and then mutates into, and I'm keen to hear your views on this, John, because I know you're not a fan of Code Veronica. I would say almost like a semi-successor to Alexia, who's also very much a Tyrant in that kind of mode, but Morpheus was the second BOW that retained consciousness, awareness, speech. I'm not counting the Nemesis. Because it's a criticism of Code Veronica that it began that tread into a bit more science fantasy than perhaps the slightly grounded reality of the T virus that was beforehand. How did you always take the TO92 Tyrant Morpheus being able to have that level of awareness as a monster?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really like it because it went against everything we'd known up to that point in terms of how Tyrants worked and how they functioned. So it's something I kind of wish wasn't there. But as to an explanation as to why he can do it, I honestly don't really have an answer. They just wanted him to retain his consciousness and be able to still speak, a bit like the same with Sergei when he turns into a monster as well. And it just sort of, I think Dead Aim gave birth to this concept in retrospect, with final bosses being able to sort of keep the sanity to some degree and still be able to communicate with you. Because I think we saw it again with Jack Norman in Revelations and things like that. And it's not something I particularly enjoy. But for an in-universe explanation as to why he can still talk to you, I don't really have one, I'm afraid. Sorry to disappoint.
And of course, the organic high heels. I don't think there's any explanation for that. But Rob, what about you? How do you take Morpheus / Tyrant? Do you think it was a good addition to the lore or something that should have been forgotten?
I feel like it is something that's been forgotten. And probably justifiably. I think it is pretty silly. And I think it's just one of those cases, as you're kind of alluding to, is just circumstances of trying to create an interesting boss. I mean, it's not that the idea is not, you could have done something with it, but I don't think the outcome was the right choice. I don't know if there's much more I can say about it that you guys haven't already.
Sean, what about you?
It's a bit outlandish, but It's not anything that's personally bothered me on any kind of level. I mean, I know we've sort of made humorous remarks about the high heels and stuff like that, but even that, it didn't bother me too much. I have no real sort of theory or anything about it. I just took it on face value. And with response to the fact that Morpheus can talk and retain the consciousness, I find it very interesting that in the timeline you've got this set in 2002 and 2003, and John's mentioned Sergei, which is the 2003 thing. Resident Evil just seemed to hit this peak, didn't it, with monsters being able to speak and retain their consciousness. I don't think there's anything in it really.
All right, it is just what it is, really, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I hate that phrase, but you know what I mean. He serves the purpose of being the end boss. You've got the token weapon to take down the specific BOW. Successor to the linear launcher, the rocket launcher, whatever it needs to be. You've got all that. The thing I enjoyed the most about Morpheus was the fact that his mutation was on point with what we'd seen before with the G virus, whereas his first form was just odd and it felt a bit gameplay. It's like, well, we're going to make a tyrant and we're going to make him near immune. You won't be able to do anything to him till the end of the game. Well, I don't know. We'll make him electric for some reason. We like the Albinoid in Code Veronica. Let's expand upon that. And they didn't have to do that, and that didn't seem very G virus to me. And there's still no real explanation. We combined the T virus with the G virus, and we made electricity. And it's like, okay, didn't see that coming. And so that was always felt a bit off. But it's only when you actually do inflict a lot of damage to Morpheus, then you see the G virus kick in, and that's when I was like, okay, I get it, I get that. This works for me. And that, although the stupid whack-a-mole end boss is stupid, that G mutation is very much in line with Birkin G4, G5, and arguably even Curtis to an extent. That's how the G virus works, and I like that. And sometimes you can miss this even after you kill him at the end of the boss. That doesn't kill him. Morpheus Form 3 gets as big as the bloody island. He's enormous, and the only thing that takes him out is his own missile silos, which is quite poetic. They go off. You don't stop them, and it's more. I don't think it's Morpheus that saves the day in the sense. He becomes so big, his mass absorbs it all and kills him.
Yeah, he basically absorbs all the missiles and they sort of detonate within his mass, don't they? And that sort of subdues the damage they would cause.
But yeah, I'm just not a big fan of Form 1. I don't see what the electricity element brought. I know that and it's kind of it's hand waved a little bit in the files, and it's like, oh, we this is the goal, to make electricity. Bit of a stretch. It's the least of your concerns when you're looking at what the Plagas does, in my opinion. I let it slide.
Funny thing about the TG virus, or the concept behind it as well, was, believe it or not, Remake 2 threw a bit of a spanner in the works as to how it works. I mean, fancy that, the remake causing a problem with a prior game. Completely unheard of. But anyway, the TG, basically the fusion of the TG virus, it's not really explained very well, but obviously we know how dangerous and volatile and unpredictable the G virus is. And it's assumed that certain genes were swapped out and replaced with the less volatile counterparts from the T virus, and in that sense the T virus acts as an antibody to the G virus and helps keep it under control, because that's how it's described in the Japanese version of the file. It describes the T virus as an antibody to the G virus. It stops it from being as out of control as it is in its natural raw form. But if I'm remembering correctly, there is a file in Remake 2 where it's talking about the G virus experiments in the orphanage. And one particular test subject is someone who has a kind of natural resistance to the T virus, and they basically inject him with the G virus to see what happens. And it basically doesn't do anything at all. Basically, the T virus resistance does nothing to stop the mental deterioration of the G virus. And that kind of goes against what Dead Aim is suggesting by fusing the T and G virus together, because they're saying the T virus helps keep the G virus at bay somewhat. And Remake 2 was just trampled all over that and said, no, it doesn't make any difference at all. It's something the writers of Remake 2 will have never ever considered, but it's just one of those annoying little things that I don't like.
Well, okay, so that I think that's quite an interesting discussion on the TG virus. One of the things that Dead Aim is universally praised for is its save room music. I think a lot of people will know the save room music, but won't necessarily know where the game comes from. Let's talk about the general soundtrack to Dead Aim. It's got a good soundtrack, isn't it? And
Phenomenal. Yes.
it has got. So I want to kind of end. We've kind of dissected a lot of the BOWs, what doesn't work. Some of the storylines are a bit quirky. The controls not the best. So let's end on a kind of general positivity here with the soundtrack. Why not?
You want some hyperbole? Save room music is the best in the series. There you go.
It's great. It really is good. You can talk about this, the kind of soundtrack and the general voice acting as well. If you kind of mix it in one. I mean, I don't want to repeat too much, but I mean, even after 20 years, the hilarious voice acting and or mismatch to the subtitles is still one of amusement. When we're playing, it's like two different games going on at the same time. Very rarely do they actually mix, but never mind. Yeah, so this is one of the. It's got a very, I'd say, almost like an 80s vibe going on. The music's all kind of like chilled and I wish I knew musical terms better, but do you know what I mean? The kind of opening track, the kind of like holding music in the game, it's all kind of like boo, 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 boo. It's all do you know what I mean? It's all kind of, it's a bit Vice City like, I think. I don't know, that's the kind of vibe that you're going for. It's all kind of chilled, and then at the other end of the spectrum you've got shot, gun right. It's all over the place, but it suits the game so well. I think it is testament to how it works. Some of I don't know. I'm rabbiting now because I do like it, but it's so hard to pinpoint exactly what they're going for. But the vibe is very on point.
It's like the game itself. It's very minimalist. Because apart from key cutscenes and boss battles, and obviously the introduction, is there any sort of ambient tracks that play throughout? You get certain sounds in the mansion when the hunters come back, for example. You get that ominous soundtrack, but there doesn't seem to be anything like that in Dead Aim. You just get the sort of ticking over of the ship. You can hear it creaking and groaning, which I think works well.
Yep.
But I can't think of any soundtracks or tracks off the top of my head that sort of play when you hit certain areas to sort of raise the the atmosphere at all. It's just sort of boss battle tracks and cutscene tracks from what I can remember.
I think that they are certainly the standout. The encounters with Tyrant, with Morpheus as well in that battle, and I really like that kind of. Oh, you're gonna make me do it. That kind of noise, that kind of that you get when he's close by and he. I don't know, I can't do it. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of electrical sound when he's kind of chasing you through the ship. Sean, soundtracks then, what are the key points? But no, I think a lot of it is quite minimalistic.
It is. And outside of the savoury music and obviously the Rise track and the Heroes Never Die music, which is also the basis of the save room theme, there isn't a great deal of music. It is generally more atmospheric audio, which is in keeping with tends to be where Resident Evil is now. Where music is more minimalist. If you play Resident Evil 7, the music is very, very minimalist, and it only sort of kicks in for key themes and key moments. Did this start in Dead Aim? I'm not saying it did, but it's interesting that this is probably the first game we recognise it for doing it. I think the music to this game is exceptional. There's not a lot of it, and certainly we're not in an era where each boss has its own theme or anything like that. It doesn't hurt the game. Because what it lacks in music, it makes for in atmosphere, and no one expected that from a gun survivor game.
No. Rob, what about you? Any soundtracks or pieces of music that spoke to you?
Not necessarily. I mean, the sound design on this is generally pretty good, and it's interesting you guys back during that stream picked out some of the audio background sound effect stuff that perhaps you hadn't noticed before. I think it's one of its more solid things. It is a solid soundtrack, but there's nothing particular that stands out to me.
There's 11 tracks. I'm just looking at the soundtrack. There's 11.
And then they licensed, actual music for part of the promo as well. So that's probably the most iconic of all of them, really.
The Pluto track I remember being quite funny, mainly because of the sound effects of Pluto. When he comes after, it never makes me cry with laughter. I think he's one of the most funniest boss fights. But that's got quite a good soundtrack when we played it, because you can play that really stealthily, and that works really well.
Yeah, again, it's less of a piece of music though, more just of a repetitive tone to set the mood.
Yeah.
But it works. I'm not saying it doesn't work.
But overall, I think we are in agreement. It's a good thing. And as I said on your recent stream, we picked up on a few different sound effects which really do add to it. As the ship moving was a particular highlight on my recent playthrough as well. I appreciate a lot of these older games a bit more. I've got a slightly better sound system rather than listening to through CRT TVs. I can listen to them decent speakers, and you do pick up on a lot of this, and it's good. It's good they've put a lot of thought in it, and the kind of water sound effects, the fire is really good. That all sounds really nice when you're getting close to it, and as I said, who doesn't love Rise gunshot, shot? An absolute classic all day. Right, we are coming towards the end, and I wanted to kind of end our main discussion just as a kind of in a reflective state on Dead Aim, because we've touched upon so much here. We've talked about how the game plays and how it feels, and the bosses, BOWs. The storyline in particular still resonates, I think, albeit could be deemed as unnecessary in the wider lore, but that we'll leave that to our listeners to see what they think, if they how important they think it is. But we do praise Dead Aim quite a lot, and you can hear from the discussions where you can see those little tidbits of of the game being ideas being used in future titles. And I think people may be unaware that I think one of the original Resident Evil 3s was going to be set on a boat. I think with Hunk, wasn't it? Was it? I can't remember. There's been so many. Rob, you're probably more likely to know.
Three or four, depending on your timeline spacing. Yes.
I'm not saying they used assets from it, far from it, but they obviously used that idea to to kind of bring it together. But we like to praise it, and I think what we've discussed today is that there's a lot of happy coincidences, and perhaps that's a nice 2-word summary of Resident Evil Dead Aim. It's a happy coincidence in that it came along at the right time for PlayStation owners. It was half decent, and it brings a lot of joy to a lot of people just because it does a lot of things right and retrospectively works quite well. Perhaps not the original intent, but for a quick hour and a half, 2-hour romp in familiar Resident Evil scenarios and and location themes, I still love it. I still love this game. And I always put it in my near to the top tier list for me personally. It's hard not to like it, and I don't get it when people say it's crap, because it's not crap. It's not. It's not terrible. And when people say like Survivor 1's terrible, I get that. I get it. Tank controls, first person, doesn't necessarily work that well. The gun comm on that is atrocious. The voice acting is appalling, and the graphics are pretty substandard at that point in time. I like Survivor 1. We've talked about that a lot. But I can see why people say that's a poor game. Dead Aim is not a poor game. It's budget, yes. It's off the wall. It's quirky, and it's got some ridiculous ideas at times, but it does set a foundation for what we do see. And with like Village and 7, and this kind of first person, third person kind of mix, the more action orientated approach, gory, very very gory as well. It deserves a second look, and I'm upset that it is stuck on PlayStation 2. It really is a travesty, and it should be available, because I think if people did go back to it now, and if they got their head around the controls, and I know that's a big sticking point for a lot of people nowadays, people want modern controls, otherwise it's unplayable, and it's like, it's not. You just get used to it, and you'll be fine. I think it deserves a little appraisal, and it's a shame we don't have many more of these games. I think we've talked about the last kind of real B-side RE game was Revelations 2, and I'm not including Umbrella Corps, because that's C-rated. But you know what I mean, and this was, this is a decent spin-off. I mean, I can't remember what I scored it in episode 4, but for me it's a 7. I don't know about what everyone else thinks, and I still think it holds up perfectly fine. I don't think time has been good to it, but I don't think time's been bad to it. I think it's stayed exactly where it was, and it knows exactly what it wanted to do, and it's done it well.
Well, you mentioned Revelations 2, and what a beautiful lead-in, because I just briefly want to talk about the fact that we've talked about the fact that Dead Aim is a bit of a legacy title in terms of, it introduced a few things that we saw the mainline series do. And you mentioned Revelations 2 there. Thank you very much. You did it before I did. And I said earlier that Revelations 2 was going to get mentioned again today. And Revelations 2 introduced a few things. It was one of the first games that introduced like the crafting mechanics in the Resident Evil series. We could combine multiple items in the way that you could do in The Last of Us, and you could combine a green herb with something or combine it with something else to do this thing. And we've seen that expanded in the numbered titles. And most recently this year, you saw Resident Evil 4 that literally lifted the stealth mechanics system from Revelations 2. Yeah, you can make a case that it was borrowed originally from The Last of Us and whatnot, but if we're just talking the Resident Evil series, the stealth mechanic that we saw in Resident Evil 4 Remake is extremely similar, if not the same, that we had in Revelations 2. So when people say to me, oh, why are you so sad about the remakes? We're still getting a remake and a new game alternating more or less here and there. Because what saddens me about the remakes is they've replaced the spin-offs like Dead Aim and Revelations. And what Dead Aim and what Revelations allowed this series to do was experiment. It was a sub-series that allowed Capcom to go, let's try some weird shit with this series. Let's put a stealth mechanic in a game and let's see if it works. And in Revelations 2, I guess they kind of decided at some point it worked because they literally imported it into RE4. And now we live in an era where we have no spin-offs. We have the core numbered titles and we have the remakes, and we have no spin-offs outside of like Reverse and Resistance, which are their own things anyway. They're doing the sort of multiplayer thing. Without spin-offs, we don't have a Capcom that is unafraid to experiment with taking this series in outlandish and different directions. And this is what I've always said about Dead Aim, was even back in 2003 it represented a Capcom that was prepared to take this series and apply something different to it and try something different. And if it didn't work, then it was a spin-off. And if it failed and if it didn't perform financially, it didn't matter because it was a spin-off. Whereas now it feels like we live in a Capcom era where every single game has to deliver. Not just critically, but financially. So the remakes have to deliver because they've got the legacy that they have to live up to. And a new numbered title has to give everybody what they want from the hunger of having a brand new Resident Evil title. With no spin-offs, you can't ever try something new, you can't do something clever, you can't try an interesting new gameplay mechanic, and if it doesn't fucking work, it doesn't matter. And that's what Dead Aim represents to me. It represented a Capcom that just went, we've got a Resident Evil game, should we just try this shit? Should we just try something? And if it doesn't work, who cares? People will just write it off as a survivor game, which most people do. Revelations, you can just turn around and say, I don't like Revelations 2, blah, 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 and all this. Capcom today have set themselves up in an era where they cannot fail, and I do wonder whether that means we will not truly get any kind of innovation now moving forward, because they have allowed themselves an environment where they can't afford to mess up, and that's a shame. And I think that's the biggest blow the remakes have dealt upon this series, is that we will probably never ever get a Dead Aim under the current remake era.
I do wonder if that is endemic of perhaps the rising costs of video games as well. I wonder.
Likely so. But that's what spin-offs offer. It offers you the chance to do something interesting without spending a great deal of money. No one would ever look at this series and say Revelations 2 cost a lot of money, because I think it very much didn't, did it? I know it cost a lot of money in terms of game
compared to compared to a mainline title, no.
Yeah. It's closer to an indie title sort of development. Well, even then, it's not. It's still a big budget title.
Interesting. No, really, really interesting thoughts. Rob, what's your take?
I think Sean's made some valid points there, and I think we to look at the success of spin-offs that have done well as to why they are also necessary, because they kind of can give more life to the franchise and keep it fresh and keep it in memory. And so within there are times when the main titles are still in development. But the other thing is that Capcom has pivoted sometimes from taking some of these side stories and fleshing them into actual mainline titles as well, which is when you don't even have those plans, then, as Sean also alluded to correctly, every title has to be a success. Every title has to has to prove its worth. I mean, yeah, the online titles are literally basically more or less network tests. They're proving that a stable gaming network can happen, and that they've just built something around them, and that's why they're not really true spin-offs. The Revelations 2 is the last one, and I find it unlikely now in the era of remakes that we're going to see any spin-offs anytime soon, if ever again, much like Sean has said as well. So things like Dead Aim are definitely going to become the minority, and will be even more forgotten in the long run, unfortunately, by newer players, especially by its ability to be not really easily accessed. So I guess the point is, if you're curious and want to try something a little bit different, you can always go back and play this and have fun. Like it's not a groundbreaking title. It's not going to be stunningly amazing, but you'll have some fun, and it's a solid title for what it is, even if it is a bit clunky in areas and a little bit undercooked in others. But it is fun, and that's why we wouldn't be sitting here talking about it if that wasn't the case.
Batman, what about you? Overall conclusions? Would you recommend the title to people?
Yeah, certainly. I would always recommend it. It's like Rob and Sean and yourself have said, there's plenty of good things about it. It's a fun little game. These spin-off titles are a thing of the past. Very slowly but surely it's been lost to the passage of time, and it all comes down to accessibility. I just wish Capcom would give us the long-awaited Classics edition and put the first 3 games on there and the Gun Survivor games. The only way people are going to play Dead Aim is if Capcom make it more accessible to people. Not everyone has a PC, not everyone can emulate things, not everyone wants to. And unfortunately, not many people have a PS2 these days, so it's just slowly being lost to the passing of time, and that's a sad thing. But that's sort of down to Capcom being the victims of their own success, because the franchise is still going so strongly all these years later. But yeah, overall, Dead Aim, it's a fun little game. If you can play it, I would certainly recommend you do. I think we've covered a lot of key points tonight on the storyline and its importance to the behind-the-scenes events of the sort of 2002 in-game timeline. Yeah, I don't think I can really add anything else as to what you guys have already said. Give it a go if you can get it.
Yes, please do. And I agree, I echo what you say. Classics Collection Volume 1, the original trilogy. Classics Collection Volume 2 would be Survivor 1, Survivor 2, Survivor 4. Obviously, Survivor 3 is Dino Crisis. Would be amazing, wouldn't it? I mean, certainly for Americans who didn't get Survivor 2, not that that's, it's not. As I say, it's all about accessibility. It's all about keeping these games alive. And, and you can see what Konami, not the greatest developer at the moment, come under a lot of criticism. The Metal Gear Solid collection, fantastic. And if the rumours are true about, Volume 2, what's going to be on that, if they chuck on Portable Ops, Ghost Babel, and Peace Walker on the next one.
No, hell, if they put in Guns of the Patriots, that's only ever been on PS3.
Yeah,
so
that's fantastic. It'll sell like hotcakes because people want to be able to play these old games, even if, no one's dying to play Ghost Babel on Game Boy Color, for example. But
well, they absolutely are, Nick.
Oh, they?
Great game.
The thing is, so this is going to go off tangent a little bit, but like still relevant. Like the other week, I found there's a Bill and Ted's Retro collection on PS4, and it has an NES game and some Game Boy games on it. Like, who was clamoring for that? But somebody did it, and it plays. What the hell? Amazing! Like, more of that, please.
Absolutely, no, it is, and it is game preservation, keeping it alive. That's the important thing, and as you say, Dead Aim is just becoming lost.
The greatest gift Konami will ever give us with this MGS Volume 1 Master Collection is the fact that it will be a wake-up call for Capcom, I think, genuinely. Because, the fact that they're even including the NES games.
Including Snake's Revenge, yeah.
I didn't even know what it was. I didn't even know what Snake... I had to ask. What's Snake's Revenge?
Including Snake's Revenge is every bit as including, like, the Gamecom version of Resident Evil 2.
Yeah. You've got, like, the interactive comments and comics and the scripts as well. I mean, for a company like Konami, who've had so much criticism over the last decade, this is going to generate so much goodwill if it if it plays well.
And all it does is just put the spotlight on Capcom to say, where the fuck are these original 3 titles? Where are they?
We saw from the last showcase that they are doing it with titles like Ace Attorney, so You've got to
Yeah.
think it's inevitable.
It-
Well,
They've
30th
done it with
anniversary.
they've done it with Street Fighter as well. They've done Street Fighter collections as well. So
Yeah.
And what what Konami are proud of is the fact that they've not only announced a Snake Eater remake, but on the same day they announced that the classic Snake Eater will be coming to your consoles as well. So if you don't like the direction the remake's taking, you're going to have the original available to play as well. And isn't that just perfect? Isn't that all anybody ever wants? One of the reasons why I think we were so lean in criticism in the Resident Evil 4 remake is because we acknowledged that for the first time ever, you can play the remake and its original game on the same console, and we're talking about the PS4 here. But, you can literally line up in the folders the original and the remake, and no one is bothered because on any given day you feel, I want to play this one or I want to play this one. You can't do that with Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 3. You can kind of do it with the original now, thank you to the PlayStation backwards compat system they offer. But 2 and 3 are still lost.
And what makes it even more amusing is that it can't cost a lot of money. It cannot cost a lot of money to chuck them on a disc.
In terms of like the PlayStation Network, they exist already.
Yes, yeah.
So all it's a case is Sony just flicking a switch and making it available on PS4 and 5. Because from what people understand, it's exactly the same emulator. The only thing it is done is it's a slightly updated version in that it allows rewind gameplay on the PS5.
save states and region selection.
But I imagine that is only a bolt-on from what they offered on the PS3 anyway. It's not a grand addition.
From Capcom's point of view, the only difficulty I think they would ever do is from, they could easily do a Survivor collection, chucking Gaiden as well if they want. It's not.
Nick.
Well, no one.
Brutally honest, who would buy it?
Not many, but as you said, it would. As John said, that feeling of goodwill and game preservation. The only one I'd probably at Capcom off would be Outbreak, because they couldn't just bring back Outbreak without bringing back servers and things like that, and that's where the cost would almost certainly arise. If they're going to do Outbreak, it's the only game I would think they should do it almost like a remastered or, dare I say, a remake version. I think they need to do that properly. So I'd let them off on that one, but they could do a collection with, I said, Survivor 1, Survivor 2, Gaiden, Dead Aim, Umbrella Chronicles, Darkside Chronicles as a kind of shooter action collection. Put it on limited run games or something, just have it as a digital download, fine, and that will just make money for them, albeit a small amount. But if it's physical release, just do it on limited run or something. It would be hugely popular, and more people will get to play Dead Aim. And I swear, out of all the games on the collection, Dead Aim will generate a lot more interest, and it wouldn't be lost to time as it is now. We've ended on a really depressing note. I'm really upset about that.
It's because it's not that we don't share the sentiment of your enthusiasm, Nick, but Sean has nailed it. It's like who would purchase this? You have to put it in the business sense of it has to be a collection that makes sense. Like if it was a collection of like all Resident Evil titles, like the PS1, so you have Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, plus the variations, so you'd have Director's Cut, DualShock for 2, Dreamcast version of Resident Evil 2 with Nightmare Mode. You would have to have 3, obviously, and then you'd have your Survivors and all that. Then maybe it would be worthwhile because you're collecting everything together. But I think just a series of spin-off titles by itself probably wouldn't sell too greatly.
No. And this is why when people go, oh, the game that needs the remake the most is Dead Aim or Survivor, it's like, yeah, probably, but no one would get excited in the slightest about Survivor being remade.
I could just imagine, some conference or like streaming event, and all of a sudden there's like, the Southern Fried, Bruce McGivern accent, Spencer Rain shot, and everyone's like, oh, Dead Aim, what is expecting this? No, it's never going to happen like that.
No. As much as we'd like. So the bottom line is, great little game if you can get your hands on it. Have a go. You might enjoy it, and it's pure spin-off material. But oh my god, it's it's the better for it. That does finish our retrospective look back on Dead Aim. I think we've all had an enjoyable time reminiscing about this, and I hope for people, perhaps newer listeners and newer fans of the series, can get a bit of a feel as to where the community was kind of at back in 2003, and how this game's still shining a little bit. We now, though, turn our attention to a Dead Aim themed special of Neptune's Biohazard Quiz.
Do you know your G virus from your C virus? And your Jabberwock from your Bandersnatch? Or perhaps the number of bombs that appear on the Made in Heaven vest?
Jesus Christ. What kind of fucking question is that?
I'm getting a big fat zero this week.
Yeah, I'm not going to get any of these.
We've talked about the games straying too far from the origins. This Resident Evil quiz, we're now getting Spice Girls as the correct answer. I mean, it's time to quit.
This is Neptune Biohazard Quiz. Batman. Star Tyrants. George Trevor. Robbie McGregor. Mr. Spencer. Neptune Biohazard Quiz.
Welcome everyone to the quiz. It is Dead Aim themed. It's quite an easy one, I'm afraid, this week. So I'm expecting some high scores, not too difficult. So you can close your windows. You can open up open up Notepad. Let's go. So the first question 1: true or false? The Elite Hunter is the name of the hunter you encounter in Dead Aim. Is that true or is it false? Question 2 is a timeline question. On what date are the T-virus samples stolen from Paris? Question number 3. What weapon do you find in the captain's quarters on the Spencer Rain? Question number 4. How do you unlock the charged particle rifle so that it can be used throughout the game? And question number 5. How long was the criminal Alpha held at the island before the ghastly experiments began on him? Poor chap. Held by Umbrella. How long? They're the questions, so let's see how well everyone has done. So question number 1 was a true or false question. The Elite Hunter is the name of the hunter you encounter in Dead Aim. Is that true or is it false? Stars Tyrant.
I want to say true, but I think it's wrong. I don't know why I think it's wrong, but I think it's wrong.
What are we going for? Are you going true or false?
I go true.
You're going to go true. Okay. Romby, is it true or false?
I'm going with true.
You're going with true. Batman?
I don't know if you're trying to catch us out here. I'm going to say false.
It is false. It is false. I'm afraid the Elite Hunter is not in Resident Evil Dead Aim, but the Hunter Elite is. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm not. I'm not being a bastard. I'm not being a bastard because the.
Is that Operation Raccoon City?
Thank you. The Elite Hunter is in Operation Raccoon City.
I was going to ask you. I was going to literally ask you to repeat the question and ask you if you meant Elite Hunter or Hunter Elite, and I didn't. And I fucking wish I did now, because that is bullshit. And I'm deleting my entire notepad. And I don't give a fuck about this quiz anymore. You fuck off. Don't even come to me for any more questions.
Point to Batman there. Yes.
So hang on, let me clear this the right way. So Hunter Elite is the Dead Aim one, and Elite Hunter is.
I knew this was what he was doing. I knew it. I fucking knew it. And he's called my bluff, and I try not to swear on these podcasts anymore.
I'm gonna argue that I knew. I'm gonna argue that I knew that, and I was complete, but I also didn't know which one was which. So
you're complicit in his behaviour, Rob, and you're just.
I'm not saying it's a good answer. I mean, fucking, it's an annoyingly, stupidly trick question. But I knew what once I figured out what he was actually asking. I'm like, fuck,
Nick even make a non-controversial quiz into absolute disrepute. I just don't know.
Bastard.
Back to normality then. Question number 2 was the timeline question. On what date are the T-virus samples stolen in Paris? Romby.
Oh, I couldn't remember. No idea. That one completely slipped my head.
Any guess? Any guess?
Oh,
You're not bad at your guesses, though.
sometimes. No, I've got nothing.
Stars Tarrant?
No, I have no idea.
I guess.
I know Dead Aim's timeline pretty well, but to lock me down to a literal specific date like this, I don't know. I've got too much shit going on.
18th of September, 2002.
Spot on.
Was there any surprise?
It is the 18th of September 2002. Correct. Well done. Well done. There we go. Question number 3. What weapon do you find in the captain's quarters? Batman.
The Magnum.
Stars Tarrant.
So we're completely clear, Nick, that we've covered all bases. We're going for the semi-automatic Magnum, the Desert Eagle, the Lightning Hawk, or the Magnum. I presume I have not got it wrong with all those answers I've given you.
Romby.
the Magnum.
Well, technically, no, yeah, the Magnum. But well done. Yes, I was looking for the Magnum there. Very good. Amusingly, Sean, you continued your streak on the recent playthrough of missing the grenade launcher, which you did, which you've done on both Survivor streams. Excellent.
Yeah,
but you got the Magnum. Well done. Points all round there. Well done.
Indeed.
Question number 4 was, how do you unlock the charged particle rifle so that you can use it throughout the game? What do you have to do? So another achievement question. We've had a few of these. Batman, did you know this one?
I don't actually know it. All I can remember is it's locked in like a little chamber, and do you just have to find a key to unlock it, or is that too simple?
No. The question: how do you unlock the charged particle rifle so you can use it? Because you can only use it.
Oh, right. I see. I don't know. Complete the game in under 3 hours. That seems to be the standard.
Okay, game in under 3 hours. Romby, did you know?
I think you just have to finish the hard mode.
Okay, Stars Tarrant.
You have to S rank the hard mode.
Points to Rob. You just got to complete the game on hard mode.
No, I contest that fucker endlessly. No, I finished this game. That is bullshit. I'm not having this fucker. No, I'm not. I'm
Are
not.
You sure?
You go back to your whatever guide you look at. I have finished this on every difficulty.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's S rank hard.
But have you always got S rank?
Eh?
Have you always got S rank?
No, and I haven't unlocked it on every playthrough. But when I did it on S rank hard. I unlocked the charged particle rifle.
This is a cracking GT impression from Sean tonight.
Hold on. Where would I find
I'm not
this
having
at?
this, Nick. No, I'm going to contest this to the hell.
Fine. No, let's contest. No, that's fine. That's fine. Let's pause and find it.
If you S rank on normal, you unlock everything except the charged particle rifle. It's only on hard.
Yeah, I'm double checking it. He's right.
I know it's hard mode. I know you got to complete the game on hard mode.
No,
It
you
says beat the game with S. Yeah, beat the game on S rank when hard mode starts with all weapons and unlimited ammo. If you get anything less, you get all weapons except for the charged particle rifle.
Okay. Oh, well, there we go.
So Sean is correct.
This is well researched each week.
I'm looking for that Anchorman meme that this escalated quickly.
Points to Stars Tyrant. Well done. Yes. Complete the game on hard mode with an S rank. Yeah, well done.
I feel like I don't even want to give you. I feel like I don't even want the point now. It feels wasted. Let's just fuck off.
Apologies.
What's that? What was that? I'm trying to. The Omni Shambles of a quiz. Omni Shambles of a quiz has come back.
I think you've got all your clips you need for next season's quiz jingle anyway.
Question number 5 was, how long was the criminal Alpha held at the island before the ghastly experiments began on him? Batman, do you know?
4 days.
4 days. Okay, Stars Tyrant.
Oh, I thought it was 3 days.
Romby.
I have no idea. I'm going with 5 days.
It's a month. A month. Yes, he's been captured for a month before they started to do the work. Now you make me question it all though.
You're fuck off, Nick. Fuck off. I'm not having this. Fuck off.
It is a month. Yes.
Shove your quiz up your ass.
So let's have a look at the final scores. And this podcast winner with a respectable 3 out of 5. It's Batman.
Hey, thank you.
In second place. Second place with 2 out of 5 is Stars Tyrant, and Romby, who lost the point because of Stars Tyrant's intervention, is Romby with the 1.
Hey, I agreed with him once I looked it up.
I don't even know how I got 2 out of 5, to be honest. Are you sure that's correct? Because I think I've only got 1.
Magnum.
Oh my god! Oh yeah, okay, yeah, fair enough.
There we go. So that concludes Neptune's Calamitous quiz. Join us next time when we'll have some more questions. Oh, brilliant. So thank you everyone for listening. We are rapidly finishing our Dead Aim retrospective. I hope everyone has enjoyed our in-depth discussions and an amusing anecdote at the end. Coming up next, we will be reviewing the latest CGI film, Resident Evil Death Island. And because we go the extra mile here at REP, I can now reveal that, Batman, you are going to do some field research and you are off to San Francisco, you're off to Alcatraz at the time of release of this film.
Yep. Thanks very much to the Patreons for funding this trip.
Oh no.
Oh, disclaimer, there's no Patreon money has gone towards this trip. But yeah, it's just a happy coincidence. It's going to be really cool to go around Alcatraz, and I shall look for Dylan's laboratory and aquatic liquors and all that sort of. I'll very much try to get a Chris Redfield Hawaiian shirt as well.
Yes, we need some photographs. That'll be towards end of July, August time. We'll be reviewing Death Island. Thank you everyone for listening. We hope you enjoyed Dead Aim. It is goodbye for me, Neptune.
Goodbye from me, Batman.
Goodbye from me, Stars Tyrant.
And goodbye from me, Robbie.
We can only live